council committees. This channel has been set up to make sure that anyone can observe our democratic meetings. Please therefore remember that this meeting can be watched anywhere at any time by anyone with access to the internet. There are subtitles available on the YouTube channel. These are generated by YouTube. The council is not responsible for these subtitles nor their accuracy. There is a slight delay between the meeting and a YouTube broadcast of approximately 30 seconds. Webcasting officer, please can you commence the broadcast and confirm, please?
The broadcast has started. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee on Tuesday the 13th of October 2020. Before we commence with the proceedings, I can confirm that the Council has adopted some basic etiquette rules for its remote meetings. These are as follows. Please only speak when the Chairman invites you to do so. Members, please let the Chairman know that you wish to speak through the chat function. The Chairman will introduce speakers in the order that the request to speak is made, unless there is a point of order which will be prioritised. Please minimise all distractions while you are in the meeting. Members are asked to mute their microphones when not speaking and to consider turning off your video feed to reduce interference on your connection. Please bear in mind that there may be a slight lag between the speakers and other attendees hearing you. Presentations and images will be visible on the screen. Please indicate via the chat function if you have a problem with viewing these. When referring to reports, please quote the page number and the paragraph number to assist members and officers in locating the point you wish to make. There is no private business for tonight's meeting. However, please can remind members that when dealing with private business, it's your responsibility to make sure your venue and connection is secure. If you lose connection at any point and are unable to rejoin the meeting, please contact the meeting facilitator. Please only use the chat function for the purposes prescribed for requesting to speak or for a point of order. The chat function is subject to the Access to Information regimes of FOI, EIR, and is also subject to data protection, rules of defamation, and the Council's Code of Conduct. To assist with managing the chat function for this meeting, agenda items will be populated in the chat function to act as markers. I can confirm that this meeting is quorum and may proceed. The Planning Committee consists of the following members. The Chairman, Councillor Wendy Scattergood, Vice Chairman, Councillor Ona Parker. The members are Councillor James Abbott, Kevin Bowers, Tom Cunningham, Patrick Horner, Hilton Johnson, David Mann, Andy Mundy, Frankie Ritchie, Mrs. Gabrielle Spray, Nick Unsworth, Justin Wrench. For this evening's meeting, we've had apologies from Councillor Ona Parker and Councillor Nick Unsworth. The officers for this meeting are Chris Padgey, Planning Development Manager, Matt Wild, Senior Planning Officer, Melanie Crobishley, Senior Planning Officer. Alison Webb is the Governance Officer, clerk in this meeting, and will be reading the statements submitted for public question time. I am Emma Wisby, I am the meeting facilitator. To help distinguish councillors and officers on the broadcast, councillors have a prefix of CLLR and officers have a prefix of officers. Registered public question time speakers have a prefix of PQT. I will now hand over to the Chairman, Councillor Wendy Scattergood. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Emma. Good evening, members, and good evening to members of our area who are watching this program on YouTube. As you know, I cannot see you, so please use the chat function. And I will take them in the order that I see them, but sometimes if I do miss you, I do apologise. I'm trying to look at two screens at once. I'll move straight on to the business of the evening, and the first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. I have apologies for absence from Councillor Mrs. Parker and Councillor Unsworth. Item 2, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest relating to items on the agenda having regard to the Code of Conduct for members? Councillor Abbott.
Yes, I've got two interests to declare. 5A Jimson's. During the time when I was not on planning committee, I met the objectors, took part in a protest walk and tried to get the council to get a TPO on the trees. So I think that would be regarded as predetermination and I won't take part in that item. Similarly on 5D, Appleford Farm, during the period when I wasn't on planning committee, I sense a strong personal objection to that site being developed in the form it was. So again, I would think that would probably be viewed as predetermination, and I won't take part in that item either.
Chairman, your microphone is switched off.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Good evening, Chairman. Thank you. I'd like to declare an NPI in item 5B, application 2000352, Reserve Matters, land rear of Tay Road, Earls Cone. Some of the objectors who objected to the original outline application and are still objectors are known to me. They are mainly members of the Tay Road Neighbourhood Action Group, who I gave some practical planning advice to around the process last year, and I have not at any time expressed an opinion on how this will go, so I will remain and vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Excuse me, Chairman, before you proceed, we do have Mr. Thomas in the waiting room. Could I please admit him to check his connection and then to place him back into the waiting room?
Yes,
Thank
certainly,
you.
Emma. Yes.
Apologies. Thank you, members. Good evening, Mr. Thomas. My name's Emma Wisby. I'm the meeting facilitator. You are joining us a little bit early for the items which you are a registered speaker, but for the purpose of managing this meeting, can I please test your connection? Once we test your connection, we will then place you in a waiting room. So when we get to your item on the agenda, we will then bring you forward for the meeting to read your statement. So could we just test your connection for one moment, please, Mr. Thomas?
Good evening, testing, testing.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Mr. Thomas. Just to let you know, we are currently live in our meeting. So what I will now do is place you in the waiting room. If you do need to make contact with the meeting facilitator myself, then please send me a message and we'll communicate with you that way. So thank you, Chairman. I will now place Mr. Thomas into a waiting room. Thank you, members, for that. So, members, we have 2 registered speakers in the waiting room and we'll bring those forward at the relevant item. Chairman, in light of Councillor Abbott's declaration in the first item 5A, could we just ask Councillor Abbott how he would like to deal with that matter, because we can place him in a waiting room for the duration of that item, or he can leave the meeting and I can send him a message to rejoin. Councillor Abbott, would you like to indicate, please?
If you put me in the waiting room, and then I suppose I'll try and watch it on YouTube on a separate device.
We will
Is that all right?
Yes, we will send you a message to say that we are bringing you forwards, because I can still communicate with you while you're in the waiting room.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Chairman, when you take that item, I'll place Councillor Abbott into a waiting room and monitor his connection to the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Right, we'll proceed with the agenda. And the next item is item 3, the minutes of the previous meetings. Members, the meeting of the 18th of August is still not ready, but we do have the minutes of the 22nd of September and the 29th of September. I will take them individually. Does anyone wish to raise any issues on the 22nd of September item? No. No. Can I have a proposer and a seconder for that they are correct?
Happy to move, Chair. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Find a seconder.
I'll second, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I will now move that item, and silence will indicate that you are approving those minutes. Thank you. Those ones have been approved. We now come to the minutes of the 29th of September. Does anyone wish to make any?
Move those as well, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Can I find a seconder?
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Thank you. I will now once again move those minutes, and silence will indicate approval. Those minutes have also been approved. Thank you very much indeed, members. That brings us on to item 4, public question time. We have no general questions this evening, so we'll go straight on to item 5, planning applications. Members, we do have one item under part B, but we cannot unblock this tonight without debate because the applicant has submitted a statement. So we'll go straight on to the part A applications. And the first application in part A is application 18020104, variation Gimson's King's Chase, Witham. And the first statement, which will be read by Alison, is from Mrs. Sam Mott of 27 Avenue Road, Witham, and she is an objector. Alison, are you ready to read the statement, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Sorry, Chairman, sorry to interrupt you. I just need to put Councillor Abbott into the waiting room
Oh,
for this
sorry.
item. That's okay, thank you. Councillor Abbott is now in the waiting room and I'll monitor his attendance. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Go back to you now again, Alison, please.
Yep. Thank you, Madam
Thank you.
Chairman.
Thank
This
you.
is the statement of Mrs. S. Mott. I'm writing to express my absolute objection to this development. It is an overdevelopment on the site of a lovely historical home in the middle of Witham, overlooking the park where young children play. At the moment, you can walk along the Riverwalk, and to one side is the small Maidment Crescent development, which has been there years, and then the opposite side is mature trees and shrubs, as well as wildlife. These will all be destroyed by this development. If this proposal goes ahead, you will be faced with a view of more houses, which will also spoil the current view of the houses which back onto the Riverwalk. Witham has already, in my view, got too many housing developments and does not need another one, especially in this location, which is totally inappropriate. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Alison. The second statement is from Mr. Alan Baker. He is also an objector. Are you ready to read his statement for me, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank
This is a statement by Mr. A. Baker. The officials at Braintree should have a long, hard look at themselves before they decide to destroy an area where nature is thriving. The officials should only vote for this devastation of the natural world if they live within 1 mile of the proposed building site. So when they walk by in years to come, they can walk a different route, so they do not have to hang their head in shame as the area is miles from the Braintree Council office. This proposed building site is a disgrace and should never have reached the planning stage, let alone be discussed. The people of Witham deserve a better environment, not to have the heart of the town filled with houses and petrol fumes. Stop this devastation now with regards for 1 or 2 of the council. Mr. Alan J. Baker, a resident for over 36 years. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Alison. We have one final statement for you to read on this application, and that's from Mr. Chignall, and he is speaking on behalf of Heart of Witham Preservation Group, or his statements on behalf of them. So are you ready, Alison?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you.
Despite the smile on my face, I do take issue with what the report does not say. It says that the railings are not part of the conservation area. It does not say when the park was added to the conservation area. The report said, there are some fine trees in the park and it has a good boundary of iron railings, walls and trees. It is recommended that the conservation area boundary is extended to include these. The intention in this recommendation is clear. The report references the poor state of repair in places, but fails to mention that this is due to neglect by the owner. It references the fact that Historic England failed to list the railings as they were not of national interest, but does not say that Historic England recognised that they may be considered of local interest. Whilst the report says the railings do not form part of this planning application, it goes on to say the removal of the railings would have to be resolved by the Council's asset management and operations team with the developer as appropriate. It does not say why this is necessary or why it should involve the developer. The developer hasn't applied for the railings to be removed. As the railings, which are owned by the council, are outside the red line area, this would involve the sale of open space land and the agreement of the National Playing Fields Association, who have a restrictive covenant. The report states that the removal of the railings is a small matter of detail. This is just not so. What it does not say in full are the police comments from February 2019. We do have concerns with this development with regards to its permeability and potential for crime and antisocial behaviour. We require the final details such as the proposed lighting, boundary treatments and physical security measures. As you can imagine, this aroused public opinion and a petition to preserve and renovate the railings gathered pace. The report alludes to this but does not say what the content is. The petition was sent to governance over 4 months ago. On 9th of June, governance advised that they consider that the petition applied to the current application and passed the petition to planning. Planning have never acknowledged receipt of the petition signed by 1,138 residents and only now acknowledge it in the current report. It gives me no pleasure to say this, but this failure is discourteous to the electorate, and the delay shows contempt for the petitioners and reflects badly on both the planning department and on the council and its officers. You cannot but share my doubts about the future of the railings. The fact that this issue has still not been addressed is of concern. It is for this reason that I recommend that within condition 26, that the first mention of the words prior to first occupation be deleted and replaced with no development shall commence, including site clearance and demolition, until details of the proposed means of boundary treatments to the extent of the above mentioned boundaries shall be submitted to and approved, etc. It does concern me that this application offers no protection for the railings. If the Highway Authority have confirmed that the access road can be adopted, why does their confirmation not form part of this report? That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Alison. The final statement on this application is going to be read by Councillor Michael Lager, and he is representing Witham Town Council. Councillor Lager, please. Councillor Lager, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Thank you. Right.
Thank you.
I'm not as fluent as you are with this. Anyway, here we go. The Town Council's got no objection to new conditions 27 and 28, but it considers 26 to be fatally flawed, as set out in the email on file and sent to all members. The reason your officers have proposed a condition that's intended to result in a different boundary treatment with the park and cricket ground is the realisation that the consent approved in March 2019, but yet to be formally granted, simply cannot be implemented. And it can't be implemented because the railings that the applicant proposes to remove are in fact owned by the council, and so they're not on land under the control of the applicant. No notice to the council or certificate about their removal is on file, and no proposal exists to sell them to the applicant. Disposal would involve publicity and a duty to get the best price reasonably attainable, and that could be substantial, together with consent under a covenant in favour of the National Playing Fields Association. Contrary to what's said in the report, it's inconceivable that the railings lie just outside the conservation area, given their origin, the 2007 appraisal, and the inclusion of the park and the cricket ground in the conservation area. They are part of a heritage asset that the council is under a duty to protect, and whose removal requires consent. Consent to fell trees could be required as well. The railway railings will have to stay, fundamentally altering the proposed layout and the lookout for properties on this boundary, and hence the whole development. The applicant can't just do some of the development and ignore the rest. There are numerous other defects in the original application pointed out to your officers. The ability to deliver an adopted access via river view in the space available, in conformity with the manual for streets. Essex Highways, incidentally, are known to have relied on plans and not checked for themselves. The non-standard wildlife surveys, the absence of any assurance on access to the telephone network, and ensuring that properties have a broadband connection. Incidentally, the Town Council is also waiting for the Council's planning officers to respond to the petition handed in early June, signed by over 1,100 residents, as this was considered to relate to this planning application. And a reference of a single sentence in the report to something yet to be shown to elected members is not sufficient. Well, to sum up, given the defects, and as no changes can make it deliverable, the safest path for the council is to revoke the 2019 consent and invite a new application. This, of course, will be under planning law and guidance applicable today and require a full suite of properly prepared supporting evidence, consultations, and a considered planning report for the committee to consider in due course. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Lager. And that brings us to the end of people making or submitting or making statements. And I'd like to thank Mrs. Mott, Mr. Baker, Mr. Chiggle and Councillor Lager for submitting their statements. We'll now go on to the presentation, and the presentation is going to be made by Matthew Weil. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Bear with me a second while I share my screen. Okay, thank you. So members resolved to grant planning permission of the application at Planning Committee of the 13th of March 2019 for the erection of 78 dwellings, including access, landscaping, parking and other associated works. The site, as we've heard, is Gimpson's King's Chase, Witham. Officers are now seeking a revised resolution for members' approval for the inclusion of 3 additional conditions and the addition of a HRE contribution payment within the Section 106 heads of terms. Members would have seen the late circulation on this in the update report, justifying the reason why we are now seeking to secure the HRA payment. This is also available to view on the website. So the 3 additional conditions relate to the boundary treatment between the site and Witham Park and conditions regarding the design and construction of affordable housing units. I will explore the rationale behind these conditions in the presentation, but before I do, I'd like to take this opportunity just to respond to some of the 17 representations that were received following the publication of the committee report and some other sort of more general comments that were made in public question time. Concerns have been raised about in respect of the principle of development, impact on services and facilities, the quantum of units proposed, loss of views, habitats and other technical information. However, as I've just stated, the impacts of the development in this respect were duly considered previously, found to be acceptable, and all relevant technical information would be secured through other conditions on the application. One of the comments from the Town Council was about lack of broadband condition. Officers didn't include a broadband condition on the application owing to its central location, which would enable it to tap into the existing network without too much difficulty. And the broadband is provided as standard by the developer in any case, as far as I understand. However, if members are minded to approve this revised resolution and want a condition to this effect, then we could add an additional broadband condition in. And I'll cover the other comments about the railings later on in the presentation. Okay, moving on to slide 2. So this is just a reminder really of the site context and the layout that was approved previously at committee. So the railings that I will discuss are part of the Witham Park up here on the northern side. You've got the Witham Cricket Club, Salisbury Sports Ground, Helen Court, and then you've got the River Walk over here, and you've got Newland Street up here. Okay, so in terms of the hard landscaping, so this was a plan that was put forward for approval at the last planning committee where this was heard, and it showed the boundary to the park comprising knee rail fence with some bollards here indicating that there potentially would be a connection through into the Witham Park. Since the application was resolved to grant planning permission, there have been a number of concerns raised about the existing railings in the park. The railings were not shown on the plans before as they fall outside the red line application site. So the railings ultimately don't form part of the planning application. However, in order to facilitate the access shown or the possible access shown at the north of the site, at least part of the railings would need to be removed or altered. Owing to their location outside of the site, this would be a separate matter between the council as the landowner and that of the developer. So a number of representations have been received stating that the railings are of value and are located in the conservation area. On the current mapping, the railings are shown outside of the conservation area. However, the exact boundary in the 2007 conservation area update for Witham, which included the park, which previously wasn't, where it wasn't included, is less clear. So they could be in the conservation area. They might not be. Members will have received a copy of the comments from the historic buildings consultant about the condition and historic significance of the railings, and these comments are also on the website. But irrespective of their condition and whether they're in the conservation area or not, officers do acknowledge that there is a local interest in retaining the railings. I'll just quickly show you some photos of the railings. So this is in the park with the play area to the left and the site to the right, and Witham Cricket Club and the land beyond up here. The railings are the brown coloured ones on the right, with Harris fencing behind, which delineates the site boundary. As you can see, the railings just outside. Moving on to slide 5, turning 180 degrees. The site is now on my left and the play area to my right, and King's Chase in the far distance up here. Again, you can see the railings and see the Harris fencing. Moving on to the third photo. This is the same direction I was just facing, but it's a bit closer to King's Chase. So, owing to the local concern about the railings, officers are now proposing an additional condition, number 26, which would enable further discussion between the council and the developer about the most appropriate boundary treatment for the site. The condition would prevent occupation of the plots near to the boundary until these details have been agreed, and the condition also extends to the land adjacent to Witham Cricket Club, so that there is an option to be more consistent along the western boundary with the northern boundary if this is deemed to be appropriate. This is therefore the rationale behind the proposed condition. There were quite a few representations made about the railing, some of which I've covered. The developer should be included with the council because there is a desire to create an access through this development into the park, and it makes sense as the council, as a landowner of the railings, to talk to the developer and see what can be done potentially to make that happen. And this condition would allow us to do that. But if no agreement can be reached, this is not a prerequisite to any sort of application for any planning approval at the site. This, it's not a condition, and it's not been talked about in the planning balance. So obviously, it's something that we want to see, but it's not a prerequisite to securing planning permission. Comments were raised about the local petition. I think that was one of the main reasons actually why we are now back at committee with the proposed condition. And there was comments that the application cannot be implemented, but as I've said, that is not a matter for us tonight to consider. It's whether this condition would be appropriate, and officers are satisfied that if an agreement wasn't reached, that the consent would still be lawful. Okay, moving on from the railings. So just in terms of the conditions 27 and 28. So these are the design and construction certificates. So the brief context is that the conditions are aimed at securing compliance with the accessibility standards for all ground floor affordable housing units. Accessible and adaptable housing will provide a safe and convenient approach to routes into and out of the home and outside areas, suitable circulation space, and suitable bathrooms and kitchens within the home. Important to secure owing to the ever-increasing elderly population, which will be able to live independently for longer with these proposals. And also, the aim is to reduce the need for the disabilities facilities grant, which last year cost the council £800,000. So there'll be less properties that would need to be retrospectively adapted to meet occupiers' needs. So it's a two-stage approach which we are seeking to take forward on every major application, or if it's appropriate. So one at the design stage and one at the construction stage. Officers did try initially to secure these certificates as part of the Section 106 agreement in the affordable housing schedule, but the building control service used by the applicant said that this would not be possible, but would check if the certificates were required via condition. So this is the best way of securing these certificates. And yeah, so these are the two conditions. So the first one, 27, for the design certificate is pre-commencement. So we want to make sure that before they start doing anything on the site, that those relevant affordable housing plots which are listed are comply. And then the second check is actually when they're built, to check that prior to occupation, so that if there is any discrepancies or issues, that these can be resolved before they are then occupied. And then in terms of the habitat regulations, as I've said, the developers agreed to pay HRA contribution to help offset any impacts on the Blackwater Estuary and SPA and Ramsar sites, which amounts to £9,795.24. It's proposed this is added as an additional header term in the Section 106 agreement. Okay, so just to sort of bring that all together then, so members have resolved to grant planning permission. Officers now seeking a revised resolution from members for the inclusion of 3 additional conditions and the HRA contribution within the Section 106 heads of term. Condition 26, railings, to enable further discussion owing to the local interest in the railings adjoining Whitton Park. Condition 27, the design certificate, and condition 28, the construction certificate, and the additional HRA payment that's been or that would be secured. So overall, it's recommended that the additional conditions and the HRA contribution are added to the resolution to grant, subject to the completion of the Section 106 agreement. And that is it for my presentation. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you very much indeed for your presentation. I have no members indicating they wish to speak at this present time, so I'm waiting. Councillor Spray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was just hanging back a little to see if anybody else wanted to go first, but I'm happy to. I have read very carefully the representations which came in from objectors, those who spoke today, and there's also been there's been some correspondence from Whitton Town Council as well, which I've seen, and I do understand the concerns locally about the site and the development, but it has been given outline permission. So what we are discussing and approving this evening are these reserved matters, and in particular the conditions which Matthew has just outlined. I'm happy with the additional condition on the railings. You know, it is true to say they are not actually within the development site. They aren't listed, but they do obviously have a place in the heart of local people. So I think under those circumstances, it's quite right that we are asking for some additional discussion with the developers on the boundary treatment. I think that's an entirely good thing. The other conditions around design and the affordable homes, so on, entirely appropriate that the developers are asked to do their bit towards that. So all in all, Madam Chairman, I'm happy to move officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Does that find a seconder before I move on?
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Johnson, do you wish to speak at this stage?
Not at this stage, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Apologies, Chairman, your microphone switched off.
My mouse is playing up, sorry. Does anyone else wish to speak? I have no... Oh, Councillor Wrench, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's just to go over the point that Mr. Lager raised in his speech about, I believe it was condition 26. I just wanted you to give an out. He said that condition 26 effectively is pointless. Would you just be able to address that specific concern that Mr. Lager has already raised? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wrench. I'll ask officers to come back on that for you.
Thank you, Councillor Wrench. I mean, I think if the condition was pointless, we wouldn't be presenting it to you tonight. Officers are of the opinion that the condition will help enable positive discussion between the council and the developer to, secure an appropriate boundary treatment at that site, whether that be, some way the existing railings are retained or enhanced, or whether that's a, entirely new boundary treatment which would enhance the character of the conservation area and the park setting. The condition allows all of that to happen potentially. So I would wholeheartedly disagree with that comment. Thank you.
Chris, you wish to comment as well? Over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Sorry, just to add to what Matthew's just said there, just in terms of the railings, what the other thing the condition does effectively is ensures that a suitable boundary treatment is put in place on the application site side in the event that the railings are to be retained or a smaller proportion of them end up being removed. So it's effectively ensuring that the detail that comes forward is appropriate. It is an element of detail. It's something that we would condition as a matter of course for new developments, both in between properties and around the edge of sites, to ensure that suitable boundary treatment and enclosures are provided. So that's why the condition is recommended. It's not known at the current stage whether or not that link is actually going to be created through to the park. It doesn't prevent that link being created, and it's not predicated on that link being created either. So it effectively ensures that we have control over an appropriate form of boundary treatment along that boundary. Recognising as well, obviously, as Matthew's mentioned in the presentation, some of the comments that have been made this evening at public question time, but also some of the local feeling around the quality of the railings and the desire to retain them as well. So hopefully that clarifies, Madam Chairman. And just to underline as well, obviously the recommendation before you this evening, so no formal grant of consent has been issued by the council. There was a resolution to grant, obviously, at the previous planning committee meeting. The Section 106 agreement has not been finalised, and the recommendation this evening is for a revised resolution to incorporate these three conditions and the Section 106 heads of term for the HRA. So just to clarify that point. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. Thank you. I have no indication that anyone else wishes to speak. I will just give you 1 minute to come back to see if anyone does. And if not, the meeting, it has been moved, it has been seconded. Go back to Councillor Johnson. Did you wish to add anything as you seconded it, Councillor Johnson? No. Well, members, it has been moved and seconded that we grant these three conditions and the additional HRA RAMS condition for the 106. I'll put that to the vote. Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Horner.
Against.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Mann.
For.
Councillor Monday.
For.
Councillor Ritchie.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
4.
Councillor Wrench.
4.
Thank you, members. That has been, those changes have been granted. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Matthew. And
Chairman, apologies, Chairman. Sorry, Chairman, I interrupted you prematurely. I do apologise.
It's all right, carry.
Chairman, I was just going to ask, could I readmit Councillor Abbott back to the meeting as the vote has been taken? Thank you.
Please reinstate him.
Chairman, I will just check Councillor Abbott's connection once we have him back in the meeting. Councillor Abbott, it's Emma Wisby speaking. Could you just check your connection for me, please?
Hi, is that all right?
That's great. Thank you very much,
Thank
Councillor
you.
Abbott. Chairman, you have all your members back in the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. No one's got to leave, have they? No. This brings us on to the next application, which is the application 20000352 REM. This is an application for approval of reserved matters. This is land rear of Tay Road, Earlscone, Essex. I do have statements on this application, and the statements are going to be read by Alison. And the first statement is from Mr. Richard Farnes for Tay Road Core Action Group. Alison, are you available to read Mr. Farnes?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. This is the statement by Mr. Farnes. Despite recent revisions, this development remains far too crowded. The building heights are totally out of keeping with the area and will stick out like a sore thumb. For some reason, the case officer seems to think that this is a virtue. Permission to build here should never have been granted on account of road safety issues caused by willfully adding more traffic to the dangerous Tay Road junction, and the fact that the parish council and virtually 100% of local opinion were against it for very good planning reasons. Most of the issues, such as the impact of closing Tay Road for sewerage connection, have never been properly addressed. The planning officers rode roughshod over residents' concerns with spurious arguments about adding vitality to a village bisected by a busy highway with a single primary school and doctor's surgery that are both already full. This whole case has been a monument to the democratic deficit in Braintree district planning matters. The case officer proudly trumpeted the development as sustainable, but where are the sustainable features to back up his claim? Where are details of renewable heat sources like solar panelling, heat pumps or biomass, or features such as rainwater harvesting? As we enter a climate emergency, how can the council possibly be permitting developers to build all over the countryside without proper sustainable features? This development will barely help alleviate the housing crisis when fewer than 24% of its bedrooms will be in the affordable category. Many young families need 3 bedrooms, yet only one of the affordable units in this estate fits that category. Why? Because the developer can easily meet the council's lamentable affordability targets by designating the 2 and 1 bedroom units as their affordable quota. This is hardly a serious attempt by either developer or council to address the housing issue. It would be a token sign that the council is listening if the following points were heeded. 1. Strict working hours should be fixed and enforced, with no workers on the site Saturday afternoons, Sundays and holidays. These have been flouted elsewhere. 2. There should be no security lighting left on at the site outside working hours. The wording for this is too vague in the case documents. 3. White noise reversing alarms should be required all around the site, replacing standard reversing beepers. 4. No big billboards or developers' flag displays should be permitted at or approaching the site. This estate is a prime example of a piece of speculative development that should have been stopped in its tracks right at the beginning of the process on road safety grounds alone, and probably would have been if the council had got its local plan in place instead of wasting time and money chasing its tail with the garden communities proposal. Local residents are very bitter about the way this has been handled, and the almost laughable irony that the developer is naming it Chalkney Meadow is not lost on them. For here is a greenfield site outside the village envelope that had become a wildflower meadow. After the developer has built a housing estate on it, a meadow is the very last thing it will be. That's the end of the statement of Mr. Farnes. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you very much indeed. The next statement is from Boyer Planning, and they are the agents, and I think you're going to read that as well, but I don't have a name of the person.
Yes, that's right. It's a statement by Boyer Planning on behalf of the applicant.
Thank you.
Good evening, members. This statement has been prepared by Boyer and is read on behalf of the applicant, Oakland Country Homes Limited. This is a site that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Outline permission for the site was granted in May 2019. That application agreed the quantum of development, the site layout and site access. The principle of development in terms of the number of dwellings and their location on the site is therefore established. Various applications have been submitted this year, as set out in the officer's report, including a variation of condition to amend construction times, which was approved at committee in June, a non-material amendment to refine the layout following discussions with officers, as well as applications to discharge the pre-commencement conditions imposed on the outline permission. A large amount of information has therefore been provided to officers to demonstrate how the proposals comply with local planning authority requirements. The reserved matters development in front of you today seeks to approve the details relating to the 23 units and provides information regarding the appearance, scale and landscaping proposed. As your officer has indicated, discussions with the planning and design officers in particular have led to refinements to the scheme, and this has included revisions to simplifying the appearance of the dwellings, enhancing the landscaping proposed, and highways arrangements in relation to the need to adopt the site road and provide for visitor spaces. The result is a scheme that we believe responds well in design terms to the character of the local area, delivering 23 much-needed new homes, including 40% affordable housing, in line with local policy. Other key features of the application include retention of hedgerows along the boundaries and additional planting throughout the site, provision of a comprehensive landscaping scheme, public open space contribution, and area of open space on site, which provides amenity value and ecological benefits. Provision of a variety of sizes and types of property to provide a balanced community. All garden sizes meet with Essex design standards. The garage and parking spaces sizes all comply with relevant Essex parking standards, and significant Section 106 contributions relating to local schools, Earlscombe Recreation Ground at Housewood Road, the allotments at Queen's Road, and the Tay Road Children's Play Area. The provision of 40% affordable housing and the various Section 106 contributions, including money towards the Earlscombe Recreation Ground and Play Space facilities, are considered to be significant benefits of this scheme for existing and future residents. The proposal offers a high degree of compliance with local plan policies, and it is notable that there are no objections from any statutory consultees to the scheme before you today. In summary, whilst new housing will always be contentious, through the process we hope that we have been able to positively address comments raised, and we are pleased that it now comes before you with a recommendation for approval. It is therefore respectfully requested that members endorse the positive recommendation proposed by the case officer and approve this application. Thank you for your time. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Alison. And I'd like to thank Mr. Farnes and Boyer Planning for submitting a statement. We'll now go to the presentation, as there are no more statements on this application. The presentation is going to be made by Matthew. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Bear with me 1 second while I share my screen. Okay. So this is an application for the approval of reserve matters following outline approval 18/00214/OUT granted in May 2019. The approval of reserve matters, appearance, landscaping and scale for the erection of 23 detached and semi-detached 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 bedroom dwellings, associated garages, parking, amenity areas, public open space, estate roads, private drives, drainage infrastructure and landscaping. And that's the land road, Tay Road. So the access and layout were approved at the outline stage, just to be absolutely clear. And as has been mentioned at public question time, there has been some further application since the outline application has been approved. The first one is that variation, which members may remember, which was for the variation to the working hours, which came before members on the 23rd of June this year. That was given a resolution to grant planning permission subject to securing a deed of variation. We've also had a Section 96A non-material amendment application submitted at the same time as the reserve matters application, currently before members tonight. This non-material amendment application seeks to secure some layout changes owing to changes in requirements from Essex Highways and some of the wider sort of finer points we've discussed with the developer since the granting of the outline planning permission. So I asked the developer just to prepare this, just to make it very clear. I won't dwell on it, but it just gives members an idea of what has changed. So this is the backdrop is the approved layout on the outline approval. There's been some highway amendments sought by Essex Highways, which principally referred to the visitor spaces. There's reposition of plot 2 to better accommodate a revised visitor space, which we'll see in a minute, which is down here. Amendments to the parking location for plots 17 and 18, as well as changing their garden to be communal because they are the 2 flats on the development. Some amendments to the position of garages and replacing on some of them. Amendments to the landscaping, including the removal of the maintenance strip because it's no longer necessary, and some amendments to the affordable housing units to ensure they comply with those accessibility criteria that I referred to in my previous presentation. Okay, so in terms of how the layout now appears, when scale, appearance and landscaping are taken into account with, of course, the above changes that I just mentioned, it now looks like this, as you can see on slide 3. So firstly, in respect to scale, the development will comprise 2 one-bedroom flats, 6 two-bedroom dwellings, 4 three-bedroom dwellings, 9 four-bedroom dwellings, and 1 five-bedroom dwelling. Of the 23 units, 9 would be affordable, as agreed at the outline stage, which is 40%. All of the dwellings will be 2 stories in height, which will be in keeping with the wider area. All dwellings will meet the nationally described space standards and provide a good level of amenity to future occupiers. In terms of neighbour impact, this would also be acceptable as the back-to-back distances would exceed the 25 metres set out in this design guide. And actually on properties on Tay Road, which is up here, the back-to-back distances would be more akin to 50 metres. In respect of landscaping, as I've said, the hedge maintenance area adjacent to plots 3, 4 and 10 has been removed as it's no longer necessary. And it still includes the area of open space, but there has been some further clarity on how that would actually look as part of this reserve matters application. So I have actually included more detail about this. So it's covered in the report, but just to give you an overview, so the open space will primarily serve as a SUDS attenuation basin, but will have a small degree of usability. It will, however, provide a positive visual amenity in the street scene and ecological benefit. The amenity space was always going to be small, so the amount of usability it would have obviously would still be fairly limited, even if it was flat or wasn't used for a SUDS feature. And because of this and the small usability, officers are satisfied that the lack of full usability of the public open space wouldn't render the application unacceptable. Officers have instead negotiated an additional amenity green space financial contribution of £8,754.48p in accordance with the Council's supplementary planning document. This would secure improvements to other open space within Earls Cone, and this will be secured through the variation. So the deed of variation as part of the variation application, which has, as I said, has yet to be issued. So that has been put into that document if it's approved by members tonight. Moving on to appearance. So I'll flick through this. I've got some samples of the house types and also some street scenes to go through, but just to sort of give you some sort of commentary first. So the application process, traditional style dwellings with red brick and a bluey black roof tile. It includes some small elements of white weatherboarding on some of the dwellings to add variety in the street scene. The front windows of all the properties would have stone headers and stills where appropriate, while flat cap canopies will be used consistently across the development. The rear properties will have standard soldier quarters above the windows. In terms of wider character references, the site takes some cues from existing properties along Tay Road, but does not replicate the character found on Lowfields. This is not, however, an area of concern, taking into account the eclectic mix of dwellings within the locality. The development would also be clearly distinct from Lowfields as a later addition, and I think the photos will make this fairly evident, which we'll see in a little while. So I'll just flick through the street scenes and the house types. This is the flat block, or I say flat block, the two houses which are, one is a house and one is a ground floor flat and a first floor flat. And this is one of the 3-bedroom properties. This is one of the, I think this one is also, oh no, this is a 4-bed actually, this one. But you can see the character is consistent with those details that I referred to. This is the 5-bedroom property. This is the only one on the top corner of the site. So just looking at some of the street scenes. So this is number 1, which is this one here. So that's with Tay Road behind. So that's the view. There's a few affordable houses in the centre here, but as you can see that they are tenure blind in terms of their design. You couldn't tell that they were the affordable units, and there are other house types which share the same appearance in the rest of the development, as you'll see. This is street scene number 2, which is across the site frontage here. Street scene number 3, which is this one's up the top of the site. Street scene number 7, which is along one of the small cul-de-sacs that would be created as part of the development. This is number 8, which is the other side of that cul-de-sac. And I also included, so these are the street scenes which were originally proposed with the application. So clearly there's a lot more variation in this. There's some features which are not typical of the area, like the steeper roof pitches, the black weatherboarding. It's a bit officers felt, and with the urban design officer and historic buildings consultant, that there was a bit too much going on in this development to respond to local context. So as you can tell, a lot the officers consider the development has been vastly improved compared to what it was, and that was through successful negotiation with the developer, who was willing to make changes that officers required. Okay, just quickly take you through the site photos. So the site is directly in front of me here. This is a photo looking inside the site, looking towards the back of the site. Upholt Street is up here. Tay Road is to my right. This is looking at the backs of properties on Tay Road from the other side of the site. This is looking towards the hedge boundary, which is still to be retained, but now behind the close border fence, and Lowfields is just over here from where the site is accessed. This is from the public right of way, looking back across to the site, which is behind these trees, which are outside of the red line site of the application, so are to be retained. And as you can see, in the summer months, you can't even see the, or you barely see the close border fence that has been put up. Just a couple of photos of Tay Road itself. You can see there are examples of the brick and the two-story dwellings. As I say, it's an eclectic mix. You've got some 1.5 story as well. This is the bottom of the public right of way, and another example of a sort of red brick two-story property. And this is the photo of Lowfields. So the development site's behind me. So you can see towards the top corner of the site, they are mostly bungalows, but they do become taller in height further down. But clearly, from what you've seen, the development will form its own, I suppose, new cluster of development, opposed to sort of mirroring what this is. But that will be fairly evident, I think, as you traverse through the different areas of the site. Okay, so just to sum up, so two-story development akin to properties on Tay Road and some properties on Lowfields, secure compliance with the National Desired Space Standards, and won't have a detrimental impact on neighbouring community. The appearance is traditional and formal, as I've shown you, and the materials are akin to the wider area. Landscaping has been amended to meet the needs of the site, and we have secured that additional, or we are proposing to secure that additional contribution. And then obviously the changes complement the non-material amendment application, to which Essex Highways are satisfied with the changes. Okay, so you'll see at the bottom of the committee report that there are a number of steps, if you like, before so if members resolve to grant planning permission for the reserve matters this evening, we would then make sure that all of these steps are completed prior to a decision being issued. And I can confirm that the legal agreement for point 1 has been drafted and has been basically completed. So that is almost ready to go, subject to the approval of the variation application, which, as I've said, got the resolution to grant planning permission in June. Would also wish to approve the non-material amendment application as well, and then update the description of the reserve matters reserve matters application to reflect the variation approval, because that effectively forms a new consent opposed to the original outline approval. If members have got any questions on this, then please let me know and I'll try and help. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you very much indeed. Sorry, I'm trying to look up. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Matthew, for your very clear presentation. Colleagues will, I'm sure, no doubt remember that I spoke against this application when it came before us as an outline application last year. I didn't then, and actually in many ways I still don't object to the housing and the development itself. It was the site in relation to the local roads that was the problem for me, and was a problem I know actually for many of my colleagues on the committee, and a very big issue locally. I don't regard either the junction of Tay Road with the A1124 or Tay Road itself as suitable for the additional traffic that this development is going to generate, particularly construction traffic. And I think it's going to be extremely difficult for the pedestrians who use it. However, I did realise at the time that with no objections from highways, the committee was in pretty much an impossible position to refuse it. Highways raised no objections. So what we have before us this evening is the Reserve Matters application, and just as a reminder to those watching, it's to assess three things: appearance, scale and landscaping. I know there are comments from objectors and also from the parish council about overcrowding of the site, the height of the dwellings not being in keeping with the bungalows on nearby low fields, and also the distances between the dwellings and the existing properties on both Tay Road and Upper Holt Street. Well, the number of houses was approved at the outline stage, so that is established and is not up for discussion this evening. With regards to the houses not being bungalows, as Matthew covered in his presentation and in his report, as a planning authority, we can't compel a developer to build just one type of house, however much we might like to. It simply is not possible to do that. We can ensure that there's as good a mix of style and design as possible, and also a required number of affordable housing, which this site is producing. That's in line with our policy, but we can't dictate that every dwelling should be a bungalow or of a particular size. As regards the relationship between this development and the dwellings at Lowfields, I do think the officer's explanation was very comprehensive. And with many of these things, once this development is built, and I don't think it's going to stick out like a sore thumb quite as much as local people believe. I mean, I sincerely hope not. I believe that the applicant has worked quite hard with officers in order to try and improve the scale and the design of the proposed homes. So I do hope that it will blend in with its surrounding landscape. That's my hope anyway. As far as the distances between the houses themselves and the existing property are concerned, there's been quite a lot of comment and correspondence on the website about this. But again, in the report, I think it's on sort of pages 99, there is a lot of detail about the distance between the properties that will back onto Upper Holt Street and those onto Tay Road. And for a lot of them, a lot of those sites, the distances actually exceed what is required. They most certainly meet the minimum, but in many cases actually exceed it. So for many of the objections, the planning policies have been met. There are no objections from statutory authorities. Again, I don't have an issue with the development itself. I'd still much rather that it wasn't happening. And that's because of where it is in relation to the access roads. But there we are, it has outline permission. The highways thing remains a great concern for me, but I accept that in terms of what we're being asked to determine this evening, which is scale, appearance and landscaping, it meets policy. I do just wonder if Matthew would be kind enough just to address a few of the points that Mr. Farnes made and I know that they're perhaps strictly not in relation, well, some of them to what we're discussing this evening. He mentioned 4 points: site working hours to be strictly enforced, security lighting, and actually that is relevant and is a good point, that it should not be on all night. No reversing beepers on vehicles. That will be a something for the site managers and construction people, I think, but I'd quite like just an answer on that. And no big billboards or advertising. Not sure what we can do about that, but I'd just quite like a comment on those. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Spray.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. I'm going to go back to Matthew now to answer those 3 points, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Spray, for mentioning that. I did actually mean to refer to that in my presentation, at the end of the presentation. So note point 1 about the working hours, the variation seeks to amend those, which was recommended to be approved. I think what Mr. Farnes is referring to is more about the enforcement of those working hours, which, as a council, we will do our utmost to do. And obviously we rely on members of the public telling us if there is a breach, and then we can send one of our enforcement team to go out and investigate. Regarding point 2 about the security lighting, it's not usually something that we have conditioned or will condition. I don't think it's necessarily something we, in our construction methods statement, that we would attach as a condition. There are various different measures of reducing impacts on neighbouring properties. I'm not sure there's much detail about security lighting, but I don't think it's going to be difficult for us, I think, to reasonably put that on as a condition to stop them doing that, although I'm happy to add it as an informative on the decision if members are minded. Similarly, with the white noise reversing alarms, again, I think the only examples I've seen of that are on sort of the major developments where you've got sort of like HGVs moving all the time. I don't think it would be reasonable for officers to request that here on this particular development, although I do understand the concerns of Mr. Farnes. In terms of the no big billboards or developers' flags, they can apply for advertisement consent to display those. The council would have to consider it against the relevant criteria, so that's amenity and highway safety, and that amenity includes like visuals. So if we think it's appropriate, then it will potentially will get advertisement consent, but if it's not, then we won't support the application for advertisement consent. So yeah, let me know about the informative. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Mrs. Spray, did you
Yes,
wish to respond to that?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, thank you, Matthew. That's all good. I think I would like an informative added about the security lighting, please. The other explanations were, yeah, absolutely, I quite understand, but that informative would be good. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you. Before I speak about the application as a whole, could the officer please just clarify as regards to boundary hedges? I'm a bit confused by that. I think it was stated that they're all being kept, but then it looked like one of the plans was suggesting a strip was coming out. Could you, and I couldn't see on the photographs which that bit was. If I've got that wrong, my apologies, but could you just clarify as to what the status is on that?
Please, Matthew, if you do that before Councillor Abbott speaks, it would be helpful.
Yes, certainly, Councillor Abbott. So, so the strip that was shown on the original layout was actually a maintenance strip. So it was actually like a blank bit of land, which was to be left to effectively maintain the hedge, which is outside of the application site. So the hedge itself is to be retained, and you'll have seen in that site photo where the fence is the one side of the hedge, that there's no hedge that's being lost there. There was some works done to the hedge to remove the brambles that were there, that sort of came onto the site, but the actual hedge itself is to be retained on that boundary. outside of the site, and the fence is kind of there, and that is the reason why that the maintenance strip is no longer necessary, because it wouldn't be an onerous responsibility for any future occupiers to sort of cut that bit of the hedge that may sort of come over the fence in the future. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Abbott?
Yes, that answers that question. So coming on to the wider issues, I can't say that the overall design layout is earth-shatteringly brilliant. It's adequate, I suppose. But my main concern, and it's been consistent on this as per the Fearing application, is this business of not having usable or fully usable open space. I just don't think, if we're going down this direction, I mean, this is not sustainable development. If we're trying to have space which is both a sustainable drainage feature and is supposed to be space for people to be able to stretch their legs, walk the dog, I don't think that we can be doing that, because there will clearly be times of the year, and I think one of them is right now, when there will be water, there'll be wet, there'll be muddy. And I can't support the application for that purpose. We have to be providing space for people on these sites if we're talking about, especially now with the wider national issues, giving people space to be able to exercise. And if we're not providing that on the site and we're just providing for off-site contributions, I don't think that's sufficient. So I can't support the application for that reason alone. On the security lighting, interestingly, Essex County Council does condition that on development sites. So I don't know if there's any reason why different tiers of authorities can't, but Essex County Council certainly does on minerals and waste sites. And if it is possible to condition it, I would certainly support that, because I won't go into details now because it's a live enforcement case, but in Rivenhall, we've got a situation where this has become an issue for residents living near a development site. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. I'll get Matthew to come back at the end of the thing. I'll go on to Councillor Cunningham next, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate this is sort of reserved matters for an application where that has been approved in principle, and obviously there's still a strength of local feeling and concern, and I think we have to be sensitive to that. And following on from excellent assessment, not only by the officer but also by Councillor Mrs. Spray at the beginning of the debate, in the absence of a strongly negative highways recommendation from the Highway Authority, our scope for disapproval would seem somewhat limited. I have to say, in terms of the layout, I think significant work has been done and it is more palatable potentially than it perhaps would have been initially. And therefore, Madam Chairman, I'm happy to move to grant this application, subject to the conditions already agreed in the report. But perhaps, Madam Chairman, it may be appropriate for the officer to respond to the specific point made by Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Councillor. And before I go back to that, I need to see if we have a seconder, please. Does it find a seconder?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. And I'll go back to Matthew. I do believe you said on the security thing that it was on big sites, and I would presume the Essex County Council ones are large sites, aren't they? I'll go to Chris on this, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, exactly that point, which was the answer that I was going to give. So as a matter of course, for larger development sites, you would expect more onerous conditions around construction management, which would include potentially lighting. So I think, Councillor Abbott, where you're referring to Essex County Council minerals and waste sites, you're talking about larger operations, larger movements of vehicles, materials, structures, and so forth. The construction management conditions that we ordinarily would put on for major development will be tailored depending on the scale of the proposal before us. So obviously, while this is a major development in terms of falling within that categorisation, it is at the smaller end of a scheme, and therefore the construction management strategy, which was secured by condition, and I think this was condition 10 on the previous variation application, details a whole range of measures that needs to be undertaken effectively to ensure or to mitigate as far as possible the impact of the construction phase of the development on immediate residents. It isn't impossible to condition it, but the point becomes one of reasonableness in terms of the whether or not it's becoming too onerous on the developer. Obviously, in terms of light spill, if we did have that situation during development, there could also be a separate light pollution point there, for which there are other controls. I mean, if it's something that members feel absolutely strongly and have a concern that this needs to be conditioned, we could add a condition, but I would have to say that in terms of the justification for it, given the scale, it would be difficult to justify, certainly if the applicant then subsequently appealed against the condition in terms of our justification for it, given the other measures that are in place, including the construction working hours. But that's a matter for members to consider. So that's just officer advice and a bit of hopefully some clarification as to why the condition deals with certain matters but not others that you would expect on larger sites. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Cunningham, I do believe during the presentation by Matthew, he did suggest that we could put on an informative on the security lighting, and as you've moved it, would you be satisfied with that?
I think an informative would be proportionate. I'm a bit worried that a full-blown condition, and whilst I totally acknowledge what Councillor Abbott is saying, I think that wouldn't be entirely appropriate for a development of this size. So an informative, I think, would just be very satisfactory. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Mann, as you seconded, would you be satisfied with
Agreed,
that?
Chair.
Did you wish to speak, Councillor Mann, as you seconded?
Briefly, Chair. I mean, there are some things to applaud. I think the fact that designs are tenure blind, I'm pleased to see that, and that officers have in fact resisted the impulse perhaps to replicate what is elsewhere. So this is a distinct development in its own right, and I think that's the sort of correct approach. I mean, I think in policy terms it's acceptable, but I do share the common feeling about the inadequacy of the local roads, as I frequently do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Well, no one else has indicated they wish to speak. Now, Councillor Cunningham has moved this. Councillor Mann has seconded it with an informative on the security lighting. I'm now going to put that to the vote. Councillor Abbott.
Abstain.
Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Horner.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Mann.
For.
Councillor Monday.
For.
Councillor Ritchie.
Abstain.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
In terms of this application, for.
Councillor Wrench.
Abstain.
Thank you, members. That application has been granted. Thank you very much indeed, members. Thank you. That now brings us to the application, which can be found on pages 104. This is application 20007854, 3 Congressional Road, Braintree. And we do have a statement on this application, which is going to be read by Alison. And the statement is from Mr. Mark Brand. He is the applicant. Alison, are you available to read the statement, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. This is the statement of Mr. Brand.
Thank you, Alison.
This application seeks to provide 8 one-bedroom cottages in Braintree Town Centre. In the officer's report, only 2 areas of potential conflict are identified. 1, amenity of future occupiers, and 2, parking. The planning officer's views on these 2 issues are subjective assessments and matters of judgment. In all other respects, the proposed development is considered to be acceptable. Amenity for future occupiers. The main living accommodation is on the first floor with a large window to the front and a roof light to the rear. It is, however, suggested that this gives a poor level of natural light. Actually, roof lights provide more light than a rear window would because the roof light is positioned on the slope of the vaulted roof where light is directed to the rear and central areas of the room. The light provided also exceeds building control standards. With regards to light, the sun soon rises from the east and shines across the site whilst it orientates through the south and to the west, where it will shine through the roof lights. A further criticism is that the bedrooms in all of the cottages will only have a single aspect. This is in fact the norm for the majority of our homes. As to the outlook, the red brick perimeter wall is considered an original attractive feature with a few trees beyond offering some greenery and screening to our neighbours in the converted and characteristic Tabor building. In the previous appeal decision, the inspector was satisfied with the amount of local amenity before the addition of the front gardens. We would be happy to work with officers to agree the correct treatment of boundaries of the cottages as deemed appropriate, including the screening and noise reduction of Parking Bay 4. Parking. The sizes of the parking spaces are criticised. However, the plan scaling should show they are all 2.6 metres by 5.5 metres. The Parking Standards 2009 indicate a preferred size of 2.9 metres by 5.5 metres. However, the standard referred to indicates a preference and not a strict requirement. There is no objection from highways. Officers criticise the 50% parking provided, and relevant policies state that sufficient parking should be provided to all new developments. However, the restriction can be reduced in town centre developments, which this clearly is. This is accepted in the officer's report. In 4 recent applications, officers agreed that 0 parking for 3 dwellings at the Golden Lion and 2 undersized parking spaces at 101, both of Manor Street, and 0 parking for 2 flats at 5 Rain Road and 4 flats at the Nag's Head was acceptable. As suggested, cars could not park on the nearby highway. This simply could not happen due to highway restrictions in the town centre. If further parking is required, the town car parks are all within walking distance. Conclusion. This application seeks to reuse a disused building and assist with the regeneration of the town centre. These are 2 issues that I am passionate about. There is a large amount of local support for the proposed development, which is demonstrated by the letters of support. If granted, the application site would contribute towards the Council's housing shortfall. The Council, in other cases, consistently supports lower car parking and amenity space standards in the town centre, where there is good access to those facilities. The 2 issues raised by the officer do not amount to significant or demonstrable harm. At a time when the provision of housing and the rejuvenation of the town centre are much needed, this application should be granted without hesitation. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Alison, and thank you, Mr. Brand, for submitting your statement. I do not have any more statements on this application, and I'll go straight to the presentation, which is going to be made by Melanie Corbishley. Thank you, Melanie.
Good evening, members. Just sharing my screen. No, it's that one there, full screen mode. There we go. I just wanted to draw members' attention to page 113 of the agenda. So if members are able to turn to that page, and under the section called the development plan and the second to last sentence that states that the site has a draft allocation for residential purposes. I wanted to advise members that that was incorrect, and so shouldn't bear any weight in your consideration of this application. So the application before you this evening is for the conversion of a building to be that is currently used for storage and distribution into 8 one-bedroom cottages at 3 Congressional Road in Braintree. The application site is here. It's actually the storage building behind the former hire centre on Congressional Road, just before the roundabout that serves Sainsbury's here. And this is the Sainsbury's car park, and this is the former Tabor schoolhouse, just to put the site in context, where probably most of us know. Moving on to the site plan. So these are the 8 cottages that are proposed. Bedrooms and bathrooms are provided on the ground floor, with just a single window to the front of every property, and 4 car parking spaces within the site. And this, to the bottom of the screen, is the former hire centre, which isn't included within the red line of the application site. Moving on to the next slide, these are the existing elevations of the building. So the top one here is the east-facing elevation, which overlooks the former school building, the rear of the building, and then the 2 ends. The existing floor plans. So it's a fairly open plan building at the moment, and particularly on the first floor. The whole of the first floor is open plan, and I do have some photographs later in the presentation. So this next slide shows the floor plans for both the first and second floor, sorry, ground and first floor. So on the ground floor, you can see we've got 8 bedrooms, all with an ensuite bathroom, with the fairly small window at the front of each cottage. And then at the first floor, we can see we've got open plan, living area, dining area, and kitchen. And the small rectangle marked here is the roof light that's proposed for each kitchen area. These are the proposed elevations to the building. So you can make out the 8 plots with the 8 front doors, and then on the rear of the building, the 8 roof lights that would be inserted. The next few slides, put my teeth in. The next few slides show photographs of the building and its surroundings. So this is the existing boundary wall that sits between the former storage building, and just beyond, this is the former school building that's now been converted into residential apartments. This is looking northwards. The building beyond the boundary wall, this large building here, is the St Lawrence Court residential development. And this is the top end of the northern end of the storage building. This is then looking in the opposite direction, so to the south, towards Congressional Road. The brick building that you can see in the middle of the photograph, that's the former hire shop. And then to the right-hand side is the storage building. And where this is overgrown at the moment, these are the amenity space areas. 1 parking space would be shown here. And then just beyond where you can't actually see between the 2 different buildings are the 3 other parking spaces would be proposed. The next 2 photographs are taken from inside the building, both looking towards the Tabor school, the former Tabor school. So you can make out the boundary wall. And then this side of the boundary wall is actually the property of St Lawrence Court. This is another photograph looking slightly further south. You can see the boundary wall, fairly mature vegetation along the boundary, and then the Tabor School building behind. This is a photograph of the first floor of the building as it currently stands. So you can see it's fairly open, it's open plan with windows on the eastern elevation. So to conclude, the application site is located within the town boundary of Braintree, where new development is considered acceptable in principle. Officers still consider that the proposed car parking layout is impractical, as future occupiers would have some difficulties manoeuvring within the site and leaving the site in a forward gear. Furthermore, given the spaces are undersized, they're unlikely to be practical to use. Therefore, it's considered the proposed parking layout would be unacceptable and does not comply with the policies outlined in the report. The proposal would result in an unacceptable level of internal amenity and outlook for future occupiers, giving rise to unfavourable internal environments. Furthermore, the poor level of amenities exacerbated by the poorly considered outdoor amenity space and the proximity of some car parking spaces to the dwellings. When considering the planning balance and having regard to the above and the requirements of the NPPF as a whole, officers have concluded that the proposed development would result in sufficient harm that would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits, and consequently it's recommended that planning permission be refused. Happy to take any questions, members.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Thank you. I do not have any indication from anyone that wishes to speak at the present time. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll go first. Well, this was subject to, or a very similar application, subject to an appeal. I was just trying to find the page, the date of the appeal decision from the inspector, which was to dismiss the appeal, and I think it was only earlier this year, so fairly recent. And doesn't really seem to me that an enormous amount has changed since that first application and this one. I appreciate there are some changes, but having read through the inspector's report, both the report itself and also the points that were highlighted in the officer's report, most of the points that the inspector picked up on and found issue with are still relevant around amenity space, lighting for residents, lack of parking. I know we had a representation, those of us on the committee anyway, from the applicant, along with a video showing cars reversing out and so on. That it doesn't meet standards. It's still not satisfactory as far as I'm concerned, and I did watch it all the way through. The design leaves an awful lot to be desired. Looking out onto a brick wall, however attractively that brick wall may be described by the applicant, is really not appropriate. You know, I'm sorry, I honestly could find very little about this that made me think they've actually really listened to what an inspector has said and tried to do something about it positively. So I'm actually happy to move officer's recommendation for refusal, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Does it find a seconder before I move on?
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Did you wish to speak, Councillor Johnson?
Yes, I'll just make a few comments if I may. I can't support this application. I think the whole concept looks gloomy. There's poor light values. Parking looks pretty grim to me. The whole area appears to be generally cramped. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else wish to speak?
Chairman, you have Councillor Mann on the list, please.
I do apologise, Councillor Mann. Sorry.
Not at all. Thank you. This is a site that is really begging to be developed. It's a sort of a brownfield site in a very sustainable and accessible place. And the proposal, I think the inspector did accept, wouldn't impact unduly adversely on the town centre conservation area. I think he said it would be neutral, but we have to be mindful of the inspector's report, and I think I agree with almost everything that the previous speaker have said, that there isn't a sufficient advancement here on what the what was in the appeal decision that was dismissed. We've got to consider the living conditions of future occupants, and I think, you know, outlook and amenity here as it stands in this proposal remains quite poor. But I do hope that a proposal can come forward to develop either this building or this site. I mean, on both sides of the development, or the proposed development, there is fairly recent development that is dense, but provides a suitable level of amenity for the people who've chosen to live there, and I think that's what we've got to aim for on this site as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. No, I do not have anyone else that wishes to speak. I'm sorry, I did miss Councillor Mann because I went to Councillor Johnson, who seconded it, so I do apologise. So I'm now going to put that to the vote. It has been moved and seconded that we refuse this application. It's been moved by Councillor Mrs. Spray and seconded by Councillor Johnson. Councillor Abbott.
For the refusal.
Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Horner.
For refusal.
Councillor Johnson.
For refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Mann.
For the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Monday.
For the refusal.
Councillor Ritchie.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
For.
And Councillor Wrench.
For.
Thank you, members. That application has been refused unanimously. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Abbott, you will have to be removed before we go on to the next item, and Mr. Thomas will have to be admitted. So I will hand over to Emma to deal with those two functions.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I have just admitted Mr. Thomas into the meeting, and I am now just placing Councillor Abbott into the waiting room, and I will send Councillor Abbott a message to when we are going to bring him back for the next item of business. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Emma. Mr. Thomas, would you like to make your statement now? This is on application 200101, variation Apple Tree Farm, Polecat Road, Cressing, and you are the applicant. Thank you, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
I can, yes, thank you.
Good evening, Chair, councillors, and all those listening. My name is Patrick Thomas, and I'm the Senior Planning Manager at Inland Homes. Councillors will recall that the original application for 78 new homes was presented at committee in September 2019 and subsequently approved by members. Following the resolution to grant, we have worked with your officers to complete the Section 106 agreement, which was signed in February 2020. Shortly after this, the development industry and the world were turned upside down by the COVID-19 virus. The application before you tonight seeks to vary 5 planning conditions of the original permission and add a further planning condition. The purpose of the amendment is to allow an expedient start on site, which will allow site clearance and demolition to occur in the near future. As set out in the officer's report, statutory consultees have raised no objection to the amendments proposed. We have worked with your officers to agree suitable wording that is practical and which is ultimately supported by them. Members will note that within the officer's report, there is reference to a further planning application submitted for this site in relation to amendments of plans. I understand that this application will be before members shortly for their consideration. The condition amendments before you tonight will allow an expedient start on site. The minor changes are supported by statutory consultees and officers. We very much look forward to starting on site, working with your officers and our neighbours to turn this former industrial site into a great place to live, which will help meet Braintree's demanding housing targets. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Thomas. Thank you for making your statement.
Thank you.
There are no further statements on this application, so I'll go straight to the presentation, which once again is going to be presented by Matthew. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Last one from me this evening, you'll be pleased to know. I'm just sharing my screen now. So, okay. Is that not working? There we go. So the application before you this evening is a variation of condition application, seeking to vary condition 6, C, 9, 11, 17 and 18 of application 18/00920/4, and that was for the demolition of existing buildings on the site and the erection of 78 dwellings, as has been said at public question time. And the site is Apple Tree Farm, Bolcat Road in Cressing. Just to give members a reminder as to what the site looks like, this is it, or certainly as it was approved. The amendments, which will be before members shortly on another planning committee, slightly amend the layout, but I'll go through those changes on that night. But I just thought I'd just give you a reminder as to which site this was, of those of you that were on the planning committee at the time. So I've kept the presentation fairly short because the report is quite self-explanatory for this one. But condition 6C relates to contamination, and this wants to amend the trigger. So instead of 4 weeks notice in advance of remediation work, it's just upon commencement of remediation work, which the Environmental Health Officer is happy with. Condition 9 about surface water drainage, which is a condition that is required by SUDS. The condition has been amended to remove demolition in pre-commencement, so that the developer can get on with that without being hindered by the condition. Condition 11 is the same, but has been amended from prior to commencement to first occupation. So that's just about the future maintenance of the SUDS features. So it's not something that we necessarily need to know up front. It could be something that is done much later, as now proposed. 17 is landscaping. So there's a little clause in the landscaping scheme which says that all the hard landscaping needs to be porous. But because there's a SUDS strategy, because it's a major application, this isn't necessary now. So officers are happy that requirement can be removed. 18 has been split, so it included a number of elements, earthworks and services, which have remained pre-commencement because that's important to know, before they start effectively. The other stuff, which includes enclosures, hard landscaping, minor artifacts, renewable energy, etc., that's all now changed to no above ground development. So that will enable them to start on site while demolishing the buildings and doing other works before they start effectively erecting where the dwellings would be. So it just gives them a bit more flexibility, if you like, and obviously it doesn't prejudice officers because we will still have the information sufficiently in advance to make sure that we're happy with that. I just point out that there were a couple of additional conditions that were initially requested. Crescent Parish Council did initially object again to the application, but then subsequently saw that most of their concerns had been addressed and had sent me an email just to confirm that they wish to retract their statement. So yeah, I think they don't have an objection now to the application, but so I won't go through it in too much detail, but the condition 3, they wanted a phased approach to provide materials, but in reality that we need to see what's going to happen across the whole site. We don't necessarily need to have a phased approach. Site clearance, I think, was in response to the COVID stuff, which was mentioned at public question time, but in this case we feel that the condition is suitably robust and appropriate for this site, so that remained as approved. A condition 16 about the bin external lighting details, again the trigger was wanted to be changed for this, but we've sort of agreed with the developer this would stay as it was, because we need that information at an earlier stage. And you members will have seen the on this one as well, the update report about the additional head of term, or in the deed of variation this time, for the section 106 secured as part of the original application. So the deed of variation is basically just to make sure that all of the things that we secured as part of the application transfer over into the variation, because the variation effectively forms a new planning consent. So what would happen is that this HRA payment would be put into the deed of variation as a new schedule, if members are agreeable to that, and that would then make sure that everything has been secured as well as this, and that would, as per the first application you had this evening, that would be to ensure that the development will not have an adverse impact on the Blackwood Estuary SPA/Ramsar sites. So just to briefly sum up then, the condition changes in officers' view will not materially affect the council's ability to ensure appropriate details and or means of protection for local residents on this development, and therefore the recommendation before you is to approve, subject to the inclusion of the HRA in the deed of variation. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. I haven't anyone indicating they wish to speak at the present time. Councillor Bowers.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I appreciate that I was against this application, the original application, but I appreciate tonight we're only talking about obviously the variation and the application that's in front of us. I just got one question for the officer, but I think he did cover it, but I just want to get some clarification about the concerns from environmental health. And well, I know they mentioned the hours, but the amendment's no longer sought, but about the condition 6. So I think he did say that they were happy with it. I just wanted to just confirm that is the case, please, Madam Chairman.
Yeah, I'll ask Matthew to respond, please.
Thank you, Councillor Bowers. Yes, so I had a detailed conversation with the Environmental Health Officer about the rewording of condition 6, or the slight change, and they were satisfied that that would still give them enough time to go out and look at the remediation works if they were so minded, because that's basically why the condition is like, it gives 4 weeks notice, is obviously in an ideal world, but they're still satisfied with there'll be sufficient time to go out and have a look should they need to, or should they want to, at the remediation works that would take place. I hope that answers the query. Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Bowers, did you wish to come back on that, or are you quite satisfied with that response? Yeah.
That's fine. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak, please? Yep. I think you've all got too warm and cozy in your nice warm homes and gone to sleep. Can I wake you all up, please? I need someone to speak. Councillor Cunningham. No.
Sorry, Madam Chairman, I'm having problem pressing the right button tonight. It's not a good. I blame the wet weather. I think that's what we'll do. Madam Chairman, if no one else has anything to add, then I'm happy to move officers move the officer recommendation, please, to grant the variation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. Does it find a seconder?
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Councillor Mrs. Spray, do you still wish to speak?
No, Chairman, thank you. I was either going to move or second. It's been
Right.
done.
Right, thank you very much indeed. Does anyone else wish to speak? I can't see any other names. No, I will put that to the vote. The recommendation is for approval, and I will start with Councillor Bowers.
4.
Councillor Cunningham.
4.
Councillor Horner.
4.
Councillor Johnson.
4.
Councillor Mann.
4.
Councillor Monday.
4.
Councillor Ritchie.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
4.
And Councillor Wrench.
4.
Thank you, members. That application has been granted. We now have to get Councillor Abbott back before we move on, so I just ask you to bear with us for a few moments, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I'll also be removing Mr. Thomas from the meeting as well. So I'll just remove Mr. Thomas before returning Councillor Abbott. Thank you. Apologies, members. I'm just having a small glitch, and I'm just returning Councillor Abbott. Good evening, Councillor Abbott. Could you just confirm your connection again for us, please?
Hello.
Thank you very much, Councillor Abbott. Thank you very much, Chairman. Councillor Abbott is with you, and Mr. Thomas has left the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. We now come to application. This is Part B application 20011175HH, 21 Constable Way, Black Notley. And the applicant wishes to have a statement read. And here's Mr. James Douglas, and the statement will be read by Alison. Alison, are you available, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. This
Thank
is the
you.
statement of Mr. Douglas. Dear Committee, thank you for your time this evening. Please find our comments to the 2 objections made to our extension. Black Notley Parish objection. We understand that as part of the planning process, the Parish Council visit the property in question to ascertain the validity of the planning application. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Black Notley Parish were not able to access the property to view the size and shape of the rear garden. Instead, they attempted to look over the gate. By doing so, they would only really see a third of the garden space. I extended an invitation to Black Notley Parish Council to see if they wished to view the garden in a socially distanced manner, and received the response that they would now leave it to planning to make a decision. 21 Constable Way's plot is larger than many in the area, with approximately 130 square metres of garden laid out in an L shape that wraps around the property from southeast to west. The rear extension would extend 3 metres from the rear of the property and would sit upon 14.4 square metres of the garden area. If we take into consideration the planted edges / borders, we will still have between 100 and 110 plus square metres of garden area left. One of the key aspects when deciding to extend was to ensure we still had a large enough garden for our children, and that the property would not make the immediate area look built up. To the north of the property is a very large green, and to the rear is a very large car park, which allows for maximum space and light for all houses on Turner Close and Constable Way. Therefore, in our opinion, will not give a boxed-in feel. Our garden is a south to southwesterly facing garden, which also means the extension will not block any light to any surrounding properties. The porch, as stated by the planner, does not affect the sight line of any vehicle and is set 20 feet back from the road. The design will be in keeping with the other houses in the area, with a pitched roof to match our next door neighbour. Another point to note is that the hospital field site has a mix of property designs. There is no specific uniformity to the properties. 19 Constable Way objection intrudes on garden primacy. The window is to be built into the side elevation of the northeasterly facing wall, which looks directly onto 19 Constable Way's non-feature side wall. To ensure maximum privacy, we have moved the window across, which will ensure the sight line across 19 Constable Way's garden is minimal. The window faces directly to the northeast, whilst the garden in question is to the southeast, meaning the direct view from the window will be the side wall of 19 Constable Way. We would also like it noted that the owners of 19 Constable Way received and accepted an offer on their property at the beginning of September and will be moving out of the property in the near future. They are very unlikely to be in residency when the extension is complete. We also discussed our ideas and spoke regularly with Richard and Lauren at 19 Constable Way, who made no objection to our plans before the official application was made. Finally, we would just like to state that we love living in Black Notley and our eldest child has just started school in the area. We moved here 7 years ago and plan to extend and stay here indefinitely. We have also received very positive feedback from our other 3 nearest neighbours at 1 and 2 Turner Close and 23 Constable Way, who we have also kept informed throughout the process and explained the whole project. They in turn have been very supportive. Thank you for your time and consideration, James and Tina Douglas. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Alison. Thank you for reading the statements this evening. And can I thank the applicant for sending in his statement? And we'll now go to a presentation, which I believe is going to be made by Chris. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I will just share my screen with you. So as mentioned by the applicant in his statement there, the application before you is for the erection of a 2-storey rear extension and a 1-storey front porch. The property is at number 21 Constable Way in Black Notley, so on a modern development, but as the applicant stated, actually they're a good quality modern development within the district and good variety of different dwelling types and styles across the development. So first of all, we have the location plan, shows the location of the property edged in red, and you can just make out there the hatched area, hopefully to the rear of the property, which shows the footprint of the extension. The next slide will show it a little bit more clearly. So you've got the block plan, and again, you can see the rear extension there. And as mentioned by the applicant, you can see the relationship between number 21 and on the opposite side of Turner Close, number 19. So just running through, these are the existing floor plans for the property and the existing roof plan and the existing elevation plans. So well composed property, good proportions, and the proposal. So you can see the floor plan here, you can see the front porch at the front and the rear extension at the bottom there, providing extended living area accommodation on the ground floor and a new bedroom with en-suites on the first floor. And then the other element to the proposal, you can see the existing bedroom, which would have been in the corner of the existing property. The proposal there is to insert a window into the flank elevation to provide natural light into that room. Proposed roof plan. So here again, as mentioned by the applicant, you can see the picture of the roof, so hipped at the end to match the style and character of the existing property. And then the elevation plans, which shows again well considered porch proposal, and you can see the rear extension from the side elevation there. and then the rear elevation and the other side elevation. And again, there you can see on the side the new window that would be inserted into the flank elevation of the property. Just a few photos. So this is a view back looking along the road in between number 21 and number 19 on the other side of the road. So on the left of the picture, application site, and that's where the extension would be located. Picture at the front, so picking up on the again the comment made by the applicant in terms of the impact of the porch. You can see it would be set back behind the railings there, and you can see it would be set back as well from the front. Another couple of views. I'll just skip through these. So again, you can see the host property, neighbouring property. So at the moment there is a uniformity in terms of the style of the property. Another view back at the application site, one at the rear garden, and another one around the corner of the property. So again, you can see the position of the extension on the right-hand side of the photograph there. And then just finishing with the elevations. If I move on, actually, I'll leave the presentation on that. So in terms of principle, it's obviously located within development limits. Size and scale of the extensions are considered to be in keeping with the host property. Probably the key issue in this one is in relation to the addition of the side window. The applicant has actually sought to try to address the concerns that have been raised by the neighbouring property by relocating that window further to the right-hand side so that it moves the position of it further away from the garden. Our position as officers, the proposal wouldn't give rise to a level of overlooking that would be detrimental to neighbouring residential amenity. And as I said, in terms of the design and appearance of the extension, its relationship with the host dwelling is considered to be acceptable. No issues in terms of the design or impact of the porch as well at the front. And therefore it's recommended for approval here this evening in accordance with the conditions as set out in the report. But happy to answer any further questions, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you. Councillor Cunningham, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Chris, for that. I know the site of the application very well as one of the local ward members for that area, and it is a particularly large plot compared to the neighbouring plots. I think it's to be applauded that that the applicants worked with the neighbours to try and mitigate some of the concerns they have, and I think there's a useful solution there. I appreciate the concerns raised by Black Knottley Parish Council, because the development of that new hospital site has not been without its ongoing concerns, particularly regarding the number of cars, parking, and that obviously has an impact on highway safety and particularly pedestrian safety as well. So I think they were right to make those representations, but I think those concerns have been allayed, and therefore, Madam Chairman, I'm happy to grant to move recommendation that this be granted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. Does it find a seconder? It does. And Councillor Ritchie, you have registered you wish to speak, so I'll let you speak as well.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think my colleague, Councillor Cunningham, got in just before me. I was pretty much going to echo most of what he said. I think the applicants have been more than reasonable in adjusting their plans slightly to accommodate the concerns from number 19, although by the statement, I don't think they hold much weight now, given that they've obviously decided to move away. But given the work they've done with the officers, then I'm more than happy to second moving for this application. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. I have no one else indicating they wish to speak, so I'm going to put this application to the vote. The vote is for approval. It's been moved by Councillor Cunningham and seconded by Councillor Ritchie. Councillor Abbott.
For.
Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Horner.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Mann.
For.
Councillor Monday.
For.
Councillor Ritchie.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
For.
And Councillor Wrench.
For.
Thank you, members. That has been moved and seconded and approved. unanimously. That brings us to the end of planning applications, but we now go on to agenda item 6, review of the scheme of delegation. And I think this is going to be presented by Chris. I know it's going to be presented by Chris.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, it will be. I'll take you through. Bear with me. I'll just share my screen. I've got a short presentation which summarises several key parts from the report. Just bear with me while I put the presentation onto the screen. Right, there we go. Hopefully that has all appeared now. So thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, members. So this is item 6 of your agenda, report on the review of the scheme of delegation and member engagement process. So just to start off with, by way of a bit of background, obviously, I think a key point to underline from the start, really, members are absolutely integral to the decision-making process and have a really important role to play within the wider planning process as a whole. The Council's Planning Committee is a key function of the Council and operates in an open and transparent manner, making key decisions on planning applications that are reported to it. By way of context, the last review of the scheme of delegation was undertaken back in 2015, and as part of that, it was agreed that there should be a regular review of the scheme to ensure that it is still fit for purpose and working as desired for the authority. As part of this review, before forming these proposals, I've done some engagement with the officer team and with colleagues across the organisation, looking and reflecting on the current scheme, and we've set those out within the report before you. There was a clear consensus around the current scheme that it should be revised, and a couple of the key points there really that the current scheme hasn't meant that the members of the planning committee have been able to really focus and concentrate on the determination of the most significant planning applications that are before us. The scheme itself, certainly from officers' perspective, the way it's constructed and written, as well as the various component parts, are considered to be unduly complex, and that creates various issues for us. And I think it does create a barrier as well for applicants and agents. That's been reflected in informal feedback that we've received. As a result of the way how the scheme of delegation is currently comprised, it's also contributing to some delays in our decision-making process and impacting on service delivery. So in terms of the objectives, we've summarised these into 3 main areas, really. The first principal one is to ensure that members of the planning committee are able to focus on the determination and consideration of the most significant and complex applications that are coming forward within the district. And these will be the applications that will affect how the district will grow and develop over the next several decades, and also tend to be the ones which have the high level of public interest in them owing to the scale of the proposals coming forward. The second area is to ensure that the council is able to discharge its development management function effectively and efficiently, and that we are able to consistently meet government and BDC performance targets for the determination of the various application types. And the third, which for me is a really key part of these proposals, is to address a current imbalance in the system, which is to introduce a mechanism for engagement with members of the Council's Planning Committee at the pre-application stage of the process, but also prior to the submission of the application and during the application stage, so that we are able to get engagement with members on planning proposals critically prior to the determination of that application. So I'll speak a little bit more about that shortly, but those are the 3 key objectives that we've identified from the review. And then in terms of the report, Appendix 1 of your report will set out the proposed revised scheme of delegation in full, but I thought it was just worth summarising the key construct, I suppose, of the proposal. So as per the existing scheme, it would be split into 3 parts. Part A would detail those applications which have to be referred to Planning Committee for determination. So this would be a prescriptive list of criteria that would capture what applications have got to be referred to the Planning Committee. So this would essentially comprise all major applications. So this is an area actually where we are seeking to adjust the delegation scheme at the moment, because some major applications are currently determined under delegated authority by officers. What we're suggesting within the new scheme is that all major applications would come before the Planning Committee for determination. There's also a provision there which relates to renewable energy schemes and proposals for anaerobic digestion systems and things like that. So we've had various schemes like that that have come forward that are considered to have a greater level of public interest. So again, those are applications that would automatically come before the Planning Committee for determination. And there are also the usual elements that you would expect to see, which is where the council is the applicant or the development proposed is on BDC land, but also where the applicant for the application, for instance, is a member or a employee of the district council. So the usual provisions that would exist within a scheme of delegation, so they would still be present. Part B then essentially deals with those applications which the default position would be that they could be determined under delegated powers. However, they may be subject to a referral to the chair's briefing process if the parish or the town council have made representations that are contrary to the officer recommendation, or where that application has been subject to member call-in. And as you'll see from Appendix 1 and Part B of the proposals, the application types that are proposed to be limited to Part B are for new residential development between 3 and 9 units. So there's a particular scale of development there that's indicated. And then within Part C, this sets out effectively the various application types that then can be determined under delegated powers. So the structure effectively of the 3-part remains consistent with the current scheme, but obviously the criteria within the proposals are obviously different. And as I said, I've just tried to summarise that for you, but included and set out in full within Appendix 1 of your report. So in terms of the key outcomes, again, try to keep this fairly high level in terms of the key things we think that would be achieved through the proposal. So the first, which was actually a really key thing that came out of the feedback that I've received from the team and from other colleagues, which was around really ensuring a much more prescriptive scheme of delegation that is easy to understand for all users of the planning system, that's open and transparent. So it's clear what application types are required to go to planning committee and what can effectively be dealt with under delegated powers. The second, which feeds into the objectives at the start, is around ensuring that members of the planning committee are focused on the most significant and complex applications. So namely those major applications that are coming forward within the district, which are considerable still. We've got a number of very big sites to come forward, which are draft allocated sites within the emerging local plan. We've dealt with an awful lot of outline applications, but we still have an awful lot of reserve matter approvals applications to consider. So there is an awful lot of development still to come forward in the district, and these applications will really shape the way in which the district grows and develops over the next several decades. And then the third outcome is ensuring that we have an efficient and timely procedure in place for the determination of applications. So moving on to what I consider really is a key component of the proposal. So as members will note, one of the objectives was to introduce a mechanism for member engagement. So as part of the proposals, with the readjustment of the scheme and delegation, it would enable us to introduce what we're calling a members forum, into the established processes. So this would be a forum comprising of members of this planning committee. But the intention is that that would be the invitation to that forum would be extended to local ward members and parish councils. And this is to allow for engagement at the pre-application, pre-submission and post-submission stage of the planning process with members prior to the determination of the application. So members over the last couple of years have dealt with some very considerably sized applications of quite large scale. We've had a few recently, one a few weeks ago now. Those type of applications are usually subject to quite considerable and lengthy negotiations with officers and with key stakeholders and consultees over a very long period of time. Members under the current arrangements only get to see that application when it comes before the planning committee for determination. And while you can obviously you have the final say on the application, and you obviously can influence the outcome through making that determination in terms of the detailed proposals. The first you see of the application is when it comes before the planning committee, and then you obviously have the officer report, a presentation on the night, and you get to hear from stakeholders, consultees from the parish or town council during public question time if they've registered to speak. So part of the motivation around these proposals is to ensure that actually we can introduce some meaningful engagement earlier in the process so that we are able to bring developers, applicants into a safe and structured forum where they're able to present the proposals to members. As I said, that invitation could quite easily be extended, and the intention would be that it would be extended to local ward members and parish and town councils to enable that feedback to be provided at an early stage of the process, and that would help shape and influence those proposals as they go forward. It would enable, certainly from the applicant and agent side, but also critically from officers' perspective, to understand particular issues of concern, how the proposals could be improved. For us as officers, we consider that would actually introduce a very positive change and actually would strengthen our ability to negotiate positive changes to proposals through the process. And I think critically as well, particularly for the larger scale proposals that, as I said, are subject to months, if not years of negotiation and discussion, it provides members with a greater level of confidence to see how those proposals have actually evolved from the original pre-application submission down to the final scope of the proposals as presented to members at the planning committee. So you would get a greater understanding of the discussions and work that has gone in throughout the actual process itself. In terms of the next steps as set out in the report, we are scheduling a period of public consultation later this month that's due to commence on the 26th of October to run for a period of 3 weeks ending on the 13th of November. So that would be both for key stakeholders and public consultation. We then have referrals to the Developing Democracy Group, which is scheduled for the 20th of October, and the Corporate Governance Group on the 12th of November. And subject to all of that consultation, provisionally it's proposed then to take the proposals for a revised scheme of delegation and the member engagement proposals to full council on the 7th of December for approval. So hopefully that gives an overview of the proposals. As I said, this is all set out in full within the actual report itself. But the recommendation, again, just to highlight what's included in the report, we ask members to note the proposed revised scheme of delegation as set out within the report and within Appendix 1. Note the commencement of a period of public consultation with stakeholders, and note the reference to the intention to refer this to full council for approval on the 7th of December. Madam Chairman, thank you for allowing me to present the item, and more than happy to answer any questions or clarifications, but very keen to hear members' feedback and comments on the proposals. So at that point, I will stop sharing my screen and I will pass back to you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you. Members have woken up. They're no longer asleep. Councillor Mrs. Spray first.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, I haven't been asleep. Just want to make that clear.
No one wanted to speak tonight. I thought perhaps you were getting too cosy.
No, it's fine. Anyway, thank you. And thank you, Chris, for your summary of what I know has been a very large piece of work for you and officers in pulling this together. I think it's a very timely review. For me, there are two main strands to this scheme, and I think I'd just like to make a comment to start with on possibly the less contentious one, as it happens, which is the proposed members forum, which is to give planning committee members the opportunity to view applications, you know, at an early pre-app stage. Now, actually, I think this is a bit revolutionary for this planning authority, because as long as I've been a district councillor, which is quite a few years, and I've been involved in the planning committee in its various forms right since the start, the watchword has always been that you should not engage in conversation or discussion with an applicant, landowner, agent, developer, because that enables you to avoid any suggestion of predetermination. And that's always been our sort of guideline, really. However, I think the idea of the members forum is entirely appropriate. It's a really good opportunity for members to see design and layout early on what are sometimes really major and quite important, you know, development proposals for the district. It's a chance to question developers and express concerns so that they get a good idea of the sort of high quality of development that we are always aiming to, you know, achieve in this district. And they can take concerns and questions away and hopefully do a bit of revision in discussion with officers. And when that application then does actually come before the committee, it's something ideally that we are, you know, that we are pleased to see. And I'm hoping that it would improve developers' understanding of what we're looking for. You know, these meetings will be formal. My understanding is there will be obviously officers present, there will be a governance involvement, they will be minuted. So there's no question of the planning committee being behind closed doors with developers and, you know, cooking anything up. It's going to be all absolutely above board and in the open. And I'm very pleased with the suggestion that the local ward councillor and a member of or members of the relevant town or parish council will also be invited to attend these meetings. I think that's really important, and it will give them, I think, considerably more input into things that are going to be happening in their patch than they have now. So, you know, I'm entirely in favour, and it will avoid a situation which I think you've pointed out in your presentation, where a large development which may have been in the pipeline for a couple of years comes before the committee and then gets deferred for something like the lighting, that we're not happy with the lighting being proposed, or it might be a landscaping issue, and it then has to go away and come back again. If those sort of issues can be flagged up and resolved at an early stage, then it's going to make for a much more involved and efficient process. I'm aware there are quite a few colleagues want to speak, so I won't take too much longer, Chairman. I just want to turn to the delegated decisions part of this, which is proving to be considerably more controversial from some of the correspondence I've received. And this particularly with regard to the ability of town and parish councils to contribute, whether that is for or against an application. And I think it's important to say that that ability to comment is not being taken away. The purpose of the scheme is not to be at the top of any delegated decision league table, which again seems to be a misconception. That's not what we're aiming for. It's about the committee concentrating on major and complex applications and still being able to give residents and town and parish councils some say in what happens. the fact remains that a considerable number of minor, and I'm aware that, you know, a minor application to somebody who just wants an extension or something, it's not minor to them, it's very important, but in planning terms, it's classed as minor. Considerable number of those still come to committee solely because a town or parish council has objected or occasionally supported an application contrary to officers' recommendation. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, absolutely nothing wrong with somebody having a different opinion to officers, but the problem is that sometimes the reasons for opposition are quite sketchy, and then no one from the relevant town or parish council comes to committee to sort of back up their stance. You know, you can have a comment literally where it says we're against this because it's overdevelopment of the site, and that's it, and then nobody comes to explain. But it then has to go on the agenda. An officer has to write a report, they have to prepare a presentation in case it's needed on the evening. There's a lot of time commitment from officers and then from members, and then on the evening nobody's there to speak, so the chairman says we can move this on block. And I don't think personally that that's a very efficient way these days to manage a planning process. There are some figures in the report showing the number of applications that have come forward. I think it's over the last 25 planning meetings where things have been moved on block because nobody has come to speak. And it is, you know, it is a relevant and significant number. Members call-in is another thing that's used, not very often. I actually used it not very long ago myself, but that's not going to go away either. It's still going to be perfectly possible for a member to call in an application, perfectly possible for a town or parish council to have a different opinion. The difference is that with a minor application now, it will come to the chair's briefing, and it will be up to the chair and or vice chair to decide whether or not that comes to committee. And I just want to say, because I've had some comments about, well, this will be one person sitting in a locked room. I actually read that comment, you know, just sort of ticking off a list that yes, delegated. That's not how it happens. It doesn't now, and it's not going to. And I think, in fairness, you need to say that the chair and vice chair of planning committees are appointed to those positions because they have a good knowledge of planning procedure and because they have the ability to make clear and sound decisions which are in the best interests of residents. So I think, you know, we need to credit chair and vice chair of not just our planning committee, but generally with some sense to be able to refer those applications to committee if they think that's appropriate. Nobody's going to be done out of a voice. So I think I'll leave it there because I know other people want to speak, but I think this is a sensible and very good proposal, which hopefully will just make us more efficient while staying democratic. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chair. If we are not concerned with lead cables, then I suggest you, in fact, leave them out of the report. All that particular table showed us was that we delegate more than some councils and less than others. It tells you absolutely nothing about the quality of the planning process at this council. I was taken rather by surprise with the existence of this review. I wasn't aware that the Planning Council was in any way responsible for, Planning Committee was any way responsible for delays in the decision-making process. We've been told repeatedly over the last few years that the backlog was down to a deficiency in staffing, and that officers were carrying, you know, very hard and very heavy caseloads as a result of that. And in fact, when appointments were made, I think, as Councillor Sprow reported to full council, performance improved. And her last report was that we were performing satisfactorily in almost every respect, and she in fact remarked on the progress made. Now, I do not agree that we have not been focusing on major developments. As a committee, we've managed to discuss some incredibly large proposals, 825 dwellings, 1,000 dwellings, and I don't think our consideration of those has been deficient in any way. So we have not, I think, been lacking in focus. We've been able to deal with those things and all the other minor stuff or less important stuff, perhaps, that has appeared on agendas. I don't think we abuse the coordinating system. I don't think we defer very many items at a committee. We, in fact, very seldom go against officers' recommendation, because we know that officers have worked sometimes for a couple of years on a particular application and have got rid of many of the problems as a result before it in fact comes to us. Yeah, well, I won't go on. I'm, as you can probably tell, fairly disappointed with the report. Members Forum, yeah, that's an interesting proposal. Goes very much against my sort of mindset of the sort of last 30 years, which is to keep separate from applicants and developers in order to have an open mind on the night, which I believe the code has instructed us to do, not to meet with groups of objectors or with developers either. Are we going to allow groups of objectors into sort of members forum, or is it solely be between sort of officers, members, and applicants? Yeah, well, I could go on, but I won't. I'm sure other members will have things to say.
Chris would like to clarify a couple of points which Councillor Manns raised before we move on. So I'm going to let him do that at this stage, then I come back to the members that wish to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Mann, for those comments. I've noted all of those down. There's just 2 points there that I just wanted to provide some clarifications on. Firstly, in relation to performance, you're absolutely right. The department over the last 2 years has steadily been improving in terms of its performance, and a large part of that is down to the additional resourcing and support that we've had from members for the additional posts that we've been able to get approval for, and then we've been able to subsequently recruit to. And I remain internally grateful for the support that we've had from members in relation to that, to strengthen the department in terms of the staffing resource that we have available to deal with the complexity of applications. So I wanted to clarify the point you make or reference within the report in relation to delays in the process. I want to make clear that in terms of the current scheme, obviously there are various provisions. One of those provisions is under the current Part B and the requirement to refer applications through the Chair's briefing process. So this is something that is detailed within the report that explains that effectively where you have those applications that don't fall either within the automatic referral or under those applications that can be delegated, there is a large proportion that currently have to go through the chair's briefing process. And in order to facilitate a discussion, really, a proper discussion with the chair and vice chair over the proposal, that discussion has to take place later on in the life of the application, once comments have been received from key consultees, and including the statutory consultees, including the parish and the town councillor, so that they have an awareness of all of the issues that have been raised. The timescale of that means that where those applications, and these particularly affect the group of applications that we refer to minor applications, so these would be for proposals between 1 and 9 new residential units and small scale commercial, it is particularly impacting performance around those, because even if the chair and vice chair determine that those applications can be determined under delegated powers, it then becomes sometimes quite difficult to be able to get a decision out. So the point about the delay point is not with reference to the planning committee and the process. It's more about certain elements of the scheme of delegation like that. So I just wanted to clarify that point, and absolutely in terms of performance, the department continues to improve its performance, and we're now at a level where we're performing better than we've done several years. And I do want us and the team to be able to push on further than we are at the moment, so that we can get higher up in the league table in terms of our performance. But that's not as a result, that isn't a reference to the proportion of delegated versus committee. That is our determination timescale, as well as the quality. In terms of the comment about members forum, so the proposal, to be clear, is that would comprise members of the planning committee, a representative or representatives from the parish or the town council, and the local ward members. Planning, as you know, is a public process, and it's all the better for it. We already have in place, through the statement of community involvement, what effectively our expectations on developers to engage with local community, with parish councils, with stakeholders, but also with local residents, so that where we have a major application, particularly coming forward, you would expect that applicant or developer to engage with the community. So the members forum proposal is quite specific. And actually, I should say, so some of these proposals I have, along with other members of the team, have experience of similar type of forums at other local planning authorities. And my own personal experience, having worked for an authority with that, was actually a really positive one, in that it enabled members of the planning committee to actually hold applicants and developers to account more early in the process in terms of the engagement that needs to be done with the local community. And that was always a standing issue that was considered and raised as part of that forum, as to how the developer and applicant was seeking then to engage with the local community on the proposals. And that's something at the moment that is raised, as you all will know, within representations when we're considering applications, and quite often actually it features sometimes in the public question time comments. But at that stage, we're at a determination stage of the process. It's too late. It becomes a tokenistic gesture, effectively, to do something even after the application has been submitted. So again, this is an opportunity to actually reinforce some of those mechanisms and some of the requirements within the council's own statement of community involvement, and hold applicants and developers to account. So I just wanted to make that point and just provide the clarity in terms of the scope of the meeting. It is something we've considered, but the purpose of the forum really is to introduce that engagement with members and with the town, parish, and with the local ward members, to identify issues and concerns, and enable you to get an awareness of proposals earlier on in the planning process. So thank you, Madam Chairman. I just wanted to provide that clarification.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, like Councillor Spray, there's a number of items in this report which actually seem quite exciting, and if we do take them forward, I think there will be a big step change around how the planning considerations are processed, especially if we get that chance to have some earlier engagement with some of the larger applicants. So really excited about that. Also kind of excited around parish and town councils being able to be part of that process too. The point that I was going to make was better made by Councillor Spray, where if they've got a chance to do it at an earlier stage, then it could well have beneficial use with regards to a saving on officer time, a saving on our time at committee, and also less need for letters reminding town and parish councils that if they are going to object, and the very least they could do is come to the requisite planning committee to state their objection and give some credence to their concerns, which, as Councillor Spray said, might well be valid concerns, and they will still have that mechanism to do so. Just a question for Chris, just to enable town and parish councils to have their say on this consultation, will he ensure that they all receive all the information about this as soon as possible, just given the fact that some parish councils might have already had a parish or town council meeting? They might need to get this on their next agenda, and the time frame between 26th of October and 13th of November could preclude some of them from getting back some valuable comments back to this consultation in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Actually, that's a very good point, because most of the parishes in my rural areas only meet every 2 months, and we've had the cycle. They all seem to meet the same week, all 11 of them, and they've all just happened. So, next person is Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, the corporate priority that this item starts with is connecting people and places. So that's a key test of these changes, I would suggest. I'm not against reviewing the scheme of delegation, and as it says, it's not been done for 5 years, so it's sensible to review it. However, there is a trend, a direction in all this, and that's always to centralise and increase the level of delegation. And we're not being told what the percentage would go up to. We're at 92% now, but I would imagine that figure would substantially increase. And I think it's quite ironic, really, that 92% is regarded as a low level. I mean, that means that only 8% of applications are not being decided by officers already. So it's a little bit of a sort of a counterintuitive. I'm particularly worried about the impact on parish councils of these proposals. So we keep moaning, and I think that's the word, this committee keeps moaning about parish councils not coming up to defend their position. But we don't say that about applicants who might write in and might not want to speak, or agents. Why do we always complain about parish councils? And from the parish council perspective, and because I spend a lot of time in my county role talking to parish councils, they feel they're often not listened to, actually. And a lot of them feel, well, if we send someone, and obviously now we do it all by virtual means, but in the times when they sent people actually to come to the planning committee, they felt, well, they say they're 3 minutes, and then are they listened to? So I don't think that one actually holds water. In terms of member calling, I'm concerned about that, and obviously related to the issue with the parish councils, what this scheme of delegation would do is create a gate. It would say, well, yes, you can apply to speak, but it's going to be left to the chairman and vice chairman to decide whether that actually happens. And I don't agree that that should happen. I think that there ought to be, I mean, one of the purposes of this is to make it clearer. Well, I don't think that does make it clearer, actually. I think that creates a vagary that, well, it's up to their, it's based on their view as to whether it goes forward beyond that. The forum idea, I think I agree, is an interesting idea. I don't dismiss that. I think it's got potential, particularly for the larger applications. My concern there is around predetermination. We've just been given a much stronger steer for those of us who are on parish councils about predetermination. We're now told we're predetermined even if we're in the room, if we haven't said anything at a parish council meeting, and yet we're now being told all the parish councillors and district board members and members of the planning committee all turn up to talk to developers at all 3 stages of the application process. That's, again, counterintuitive, and I'd like to know how that actually works. Couple of other points. Yes, that process also, I think, assumes approval. That's the way this sort of report seems to be written here, that we're looking at an application and all we're actually doing is sort of moving it in the right direction to eventually approve it. but that's not the starting point. The starting point is whether it's acceptable in principle. Consultation, obviously it will run its course, and it's good that this is going to be consulted on, but I have to say, Madam Chairman, in terms of it going to developing democracy group, I've just been removed from developing democracy group, and the group I lead has no seat on developing democracy, and therefore the people they represent in the parishes who might want to make representations of the residents have no voice in that process. How does that work? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Before I move on, I wonder if someone would like to move standing orders, because if this gets beyond 15:15, I didn't want to stop in flight of the next person speaking, so that we can extend the meeting.
Happy to move, Madam Chairman. Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. All those in favour, just, yeah, that's fine. I can see you all. Thank you very much. That's fine. We will be able to continue. I now have got Councillor Bowers, and then after that I'll get Chris to come back and sum up one of those two speeches. Councillor Bowers.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I just got a few points to make. First of all, I'd like to make the point, it's akin to, I think, what Councillor Mann was alluding to earlier, because when we, the mention of obviously about the focus of the determination of the most significant and complex applications, and comments in the report saying about the planning committee being under significant pressure due to the volume of applications which is required to consider. I'd just like to make the comment publicly that we take every application seriously that has come to this committee. We don't sort of rush any applications. We focus on every application. Whether we're in the chamber or doing it virtually, we can be here to all hours, you know what I mean? So it's not, I just want to make that clear. There's not a situation where the current situation is now we're sort of rushing or doing anything wrong with any other applications. We take every application seriously, and we're definitely not asleep. And also, just alluding to a point that Councillor Abbott made, from my point of view, and I'm sure other members, any speaker is listened to that comes to this committee, whether it's for or against an application, they are all listened to, and they're all taken completely seriously. Moving on to, I'd like to make a comment about sort of the officers and the delegation, and I have complete confidence in our officers. They are highly qualified staff, and I have no doubts whatsoever in their ability. So I've got complete confidence in that part of the process. With the parish council side of it, and I know we've made comments before about parish councils objecting to applications and not turning up to committee. And it's mentioned in the report the low percentage of attendance from the number of applications that may be of an opinion that's been given contrary to officer's recommendation. And I think, from my understanding, from what I get from what's going to happen going forward, is obviously it will come down to the chair's briefing with if a parish council do object and contrary to officer's recommendation, then it will be the decision whether it comes to committee or not. My understanding, I think I'm right, is the only sort of applications that would be decided via the chair's briefing is the ones where it's the parish council of object contrary to officer's recommendation, or an application that's called in. That's my understanding. Talking about a member calling, I think it's worth mentioning, and I know Councillor Sprague kind of touched on this, it's a very important tool. We need to make sure that members are aware that it's not changing at the end of the day. Whatever we're doing here, that is still live, and that is ability. I think it needs to be maybe a bit refined in regards making sure all members are clear on the process and the need for a planning reason to call in an application. And we have some members that are newer to this authority who might not have, don't expect everyone to have masses of planning knowledge, but you do need to have a little bit of an understanding of the reasons we're calling applications in, because you can't just call them in. And sort of touching on about the forum idea that's obviously been mentioned, and I'm aware that it's done in other authorities, and I can understand the reasons why we are considering going down that route. I guess it's just a couple of questions from my point of view. is there any thoughts in regards when these might take place? Because there is the understanding that there's a number of people on the planning committee that are in full-time employment. So it'd be interesting to see when the plan would be for those when they will be taking place, so everyone can sort of take part in them. And also when we have the members forum, would it be like just one application discussed at a time, or is there liable to be one or more applications? And will there be a limit on the number of, say, parish councillors that could attend? So is there any limit on that? Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bowers. I didn't mean to say that you're all asleep. It was just you all look so comfortable in your chairs at home, and no one wishes to speak. And I'm just willing someone to say, I want to speak. I will ask Chris to respond to Councillor Abbott and your comments, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. If I may as well, Councillor Ritchie just made a comment about the notification for parish and town councils, just in terms of advance warning of the consultation. So just for clarity, the parish town council newsletter that went out last week pointed parish and town councils towards the report that's before members this evening. So that's already been effectively done with that point in mind. So it's a absolutely fair point that's been raised, and we've sought to try to highlight that within the newsletter that's gone out. Just a couple of points, if I may, going back on the issues raised and a couple of the clarifications around from Councillor Abbott and from Councillor Bowers. So just a point really, I suppose, in terms of clarification on the chair's briefing process. So obviously the chair's briefing process features at the moment within the current scheme of delegation. Actually, in terms of member engagement, that does generally work well. The issue that we're effectively seeking to refine there is the number of applications that need to be referred through that process. And the point really around the prescriptive nature is to get greater certainty over more application types as to whether or not they can be dealt with under delegated powers, or whether or not they have to be referred to the planning committee for determination. So the way the proposals are set out is that chair's briefing process would be readjusted, and in relation to Part B of the revised scheme of delegation, which is specifically applicable to the minor application type. So these are for minor applications between 3 and 9 units. So again, thinking about those type of applications which again tend to raise more areas of concern locally within both parish and town councils, but also local residents and potentially local ward members. So that is where that review would effectively kick in as part of the chair's briefing process if an application received a representation from a parish or town council which was contrary to the officer recommendation on the application, or where it had been called in for determination by a member of the authority. So it would then go before the chair and vice chair to consider whether or not that application should be referred to planning committee. The situation we have at the moment is that if any application falls within that criteria, irrespective of the parish view and irrespective of the officer recommendation, it has to go through that process. So as indicated in the report last year, I think it was 325 applications went through that process, primarily of the minor category. So again, just to be clear, we have the categories for major, minor and other applications. So minor applications for residential and commercial, a large proportion of those went through that process. And then the point around the prescriptive nature and the transparency and the making it easier to understand, one of the difficulties we have at the moment is that we can take an application through that process, but then potentially, even if the chair and vice chair indicate that that application should be delegated, you then have potentially a late representation or something that comes in from the parish contrary to that, which means it has to go to planning committee. So it's that uncertainty as to the route at which that application has got to be determined, that happens potentially quite late in the process for a lot of those applications. So that's the point around that element of the proposals, really, in terms of the prescriptive nature. And as I said, it's about refining the existing chair's briefing purpose and repurposing it so it's focused on a narrower group of applications that would be coming forward around the minor application type. On the forum point, so absolutely. So the intention is around engagement, so that we're able to allow a developer applicant to come in and present the proposals to members. Members would have an opportunity to ask questions to the developer around particular points or issues. The key thing is about members keeping an open mind in the determination of that application. The key thing is about seeing the proposals. What we're trying to do is to give members an opportunity to see those proposals and how they develop at an earlier stage in the process, and for the ability to ask questions of the developer about engagement, about how the proposals have been formed. It absolutely would not be possible for any members of this committee to say definitively at that meeting at the stage as to how you feel about the application and how you would intend to determine that application when it got to planning committee. It's about engagement, and it's about giving you an awareness of what is coming forward through the planning process. And as I said, speaking from experience, that was an incredibly valuable part of the planning process that was introduced for both applicants, agents, officers, members. And the key thing from my perspective was actually, in the end, it achieved better quality outcomes. And it wasn't just predicated around applications which were either allocated or ones which maybe in principle have a position already established within the draft plan. We took many applications actually of a controversial nature that were not supported through that process. And again, it still gave members, key stakeholders, and so forth, an opportunity to see those proposals at an earlier stage of the process. So it absolutely isn't predicated on the basis that these are just applications that are coming forward for approval. There is the opportunity for this, obviously, to see potentially speculative applications at that stage. And one of the things we highlight within the report is it's an opportunity to flag issues up earlier in the process, and that may mean actually some proposals then don't actually come forward. So that was, I think, the point around the forum that Councillor Abbott, you raised. Again, the point about the comparison in terms of delegation rates, to be clear from my perspective and from officers' perspective, we are not seeking to achieve a level of delegation that is competing with the other authorities. It's about trying to get and strike a balance between those applications which have to be reported to planning committee and those that have to be, or that can be considered under delegated powers. And critically, and the way how the proposals are formed, the key thing is that in order to facilitate the introduction of what we consider actually would be a really positive element, the members forum, we need to be able to free up capacity both from officers and from members to be able to facilitate the introduction of that forum. So the proposals are effectively two sides of the same coin in that sense, that there needs to be a greater level of delegation to allow for the focus to then switch on to those larger major applications that would be coming forward. And then Councillor Bowers, linked with that, I think your question, it was twofold around how the operation, how the actual forum itself would operate. So absolutely, it would be the intention, as it would be open to members of this committee, we would obviously want the meeting itself to take place at a time when members could attend it, because otherwise it diminishes the benefits that engagement would bring. We would need to give some further thought in terms of the configuration of the meetings, but obviously at the moment planning committee meetings are scheduled for every 2 weeks. Potentially that planning committee agenda could either be split, or there could be a dedicated meeting in the diary potentially for members forum. That's all things that we'd need to give some greater level of thought to, and would certainly welcome feedback on or thoughts around that from members on those aspects of the proposals. But absolutely, we would want all members to be able to attend the forum if that got approval. So because otherwise it diminishes, as I said, the benefits and the engagement that we're seeking to achieve from that. And as for the number of agenda items, again, that would be dependent on on the schemes that are coming forward. In theory, it could be one, it could be more than one. And again, we would need to think about how we would schedule a conventional planning committee meeting alongside the forum proposal, and how the timetable of meetings was worked. So that's all elements that we would need to give some greater level of thought to in terms of how that would be effectively diarised. But absolutely, the intention would be probably an evening meeting at similar time to what planning committee is scheduled for. So hopefully those clarifications are okay. Apologies, members, if I've missed any other points. I think hopefully I've come back on the questions that have been raised by members on that, but happy to come back if I have missed anything.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Mann, you wish to come back?
Thank you, Chair. I've calmed down now, so I've regained my sunny disposition, and I'll attempt to be a bit more positive, perhaps. 3 points. There appears to be at the moment a pinch point with Chair's briefing. Now, I spent many years in Chair's sort of briefings as Vice Chair to Councillors Perks and Overall, who are names known only to me and Alison, both very long standing chairs. And we concentrated simply on the agenda, and were briefed on the agenda and sort of nothing else. We didn't then have a sort of screening role, which appears to have been incorporated now. So, I mean, is there scope for, you did speak us about adjustments in the chair's briefing. I mean, are officers at the moment over preparing for chair's briefing? Is that sort of part of where the overwork comes? There is too much reporting specifically to chair's briefing. That's first point. Second point, as regards contribution of parish councils, we know the serial offenders who object and don't turn up, or object without having proper planning grounds for objecting. How about some training for those particular bodies? You know who they are. The track record is there. Perhaps we ought to be attempting to help them, and we could also perhaps attach an obligation to attend a planning meeting if a parish council does make a substantive objection, and that might, deter them from making perhaps a more sort of frivolous and pointless objection. And third point, no point in us speeding up if our developer friends are going to sit on the applications and not build them out. So what effort are we putting into making sure that our permissions in fact come to fruition? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Mann, I think there is some confusion between the chair's briefing and the chair's briefing, because since COVID, I've not had a briefing prior to a meeting, not one. The thing we're doing is the selecting what comes to committee and what doesn't. That's the difference these days. I used to get a briefing on the planning agenda, but I don't get that anymore, and I haven't even asked for it. I think I've got enough experience to read a planning agenda, and if I need to ask Chris something, he's at the end of the phone. But that happens very rarely. I just get told who will be in attendance. I think really it's the amount of applications that the Vice Chair and I have to go through to decide which way they are. And it is very time consuming. I mean, I think this last Friday evening, Chris probably sent me 9 or 10. Well, I have to look up each plan and go through it all. It's not just a matter of looking, see if it meets policy or anything else. And I do the work thoroughly. And obviously it takes most of the weekend, and by Monday I try and respond to him. Sometimes I've still got queries. That does cause a delay. I must admit that whereas when we used to meet on a Thursday for a chair's briefing, we used to get that work done and over and done with within a couple of hours. But now, because we get it by email, obviously we're more inclined to sort of, well, I don't start looking at it on a Friday evening. Friday evening is my time for a bit of relaxation. But I must admit, sometimes at weekends I feel, oh, must do that. And, you know, it's difficult. So I think there's a mix of you're trying to you're confusing chair's briefing of the agenda with the chair's briefing of what comes to planning, and I do hope that's answered the question. But I'll let Chris speak as well, because he will see it from his point of view.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd concur with those comments. So absolutely, I think I suppose there's a differentiation we need to make in terms of a COVID world and hopefully a post-COVID world, which will hopefully not be we won't have to wait too long for. But yes, if we were to return to the normal chair's briefing session that we would have with the chair and the vice chair, the way we would approach that as officers, as senior officers, so either myself or one of the other managers, would effectively prep in advance of that meeting for the applications that have been indicated by the officer team that needed to be reported. We would collect the files, go through the various plans, making sure we had copies, and then we would literally sit and go through each application, advising on the scope and nature of the proposal, and then the chair and vice chair would then consider, based on the representations, consultations, etc., that have been received, whether or not the application was significant enough to be reported to planning committee. So that's the test that we have to follow. As Councillor Scattergood has explained, in the current situation with COVID, we are doing that remotely, but obviously, as I said, we need to think about the post-COVID world, hopefully, where things do return to a certain degree of normality. But the key point there, and this is not a criticism of the process, as I said, I think from officers' perspective, we think actually that engagement in the process does work really, really well. The issue is the volume of applications that are caught by that element of the schema that element of the schema delegation that has to go through that process. So last year we had a total of 325 applications, and as sort of mentioned within the report, the key thing is the timing of that has to be later on in the process, to enable us to report the representations, the consultation responses, the views of key consultees, which are sometimes not always provided straight up with the application. So that tends to take place later on in the process, and that's where, from a transparency and us communicating with applicants and agents, that creates a difficulty from an officer perspective, because actually we don't have that certainty until very late on in the planning process as to whether or not the application is going to be delegated or whether or not it needs to be reported to planning committee. So that's where that element of the proposal is focused, is trying to narrow the field of applications that are effectively caught by that mechanism, and to repurpose it to those minor applications for residential development between 3 and 9 units that tend to raise more issues from consultees, local residents, from parish and town councils, and similarly use that process as well to review any call-ins for those application types. And then you then have A and C, which is very clear. A, defining those applications which would have to be reported to planning committee, and C, those applications which could be determined under delegated authority. So we've tried to take some of the positive elements from the current scheme. We do feel that actually that engagement with the chair and vice chair is a positive element as it exists at the moment, but it's been trying to narrow the field and repurpose that. In terms of your point, Councillor Mann, just on the parish council front, so again, to be absolutely clear, the motivation behind the proposals has been to look at what application types should be referred to planning committee. So looking at the nature and scale of the proposal, as opposed to taking issue with the fact that parish councils are objecting or so forth. So it's absolutely right that we get those responses from parishes and towns. We consider that with every application, and we do, where issues are raised, we do carefully consider those as officers, regardless of whether or not that's in a delegated report or within a committee report. On your point about training was extensively provided in the not too distant past for parishes around planning. and similarly reminders and various letters have been sent in the past as well. I note the point about an obligation again. I think in terms of the position, it's always been made clear that if a parish council does raise an objection or a support comment that necessitates the application coming to planning committee, it's always been clear that there's an expectation for them to come to committee, but it's obviously their prerogative as to whether or not they then turn up at planning committee for that meeting. Sorry, Councillor Mann, there was a third point. Oh, sorry, developers building out. Apologies, I couldn't read my own writing there of the notes. So obviously that isn't something, as you know, through planning that we are able to control. However, the point I would make is that may be a question that could be raised as part of a member forum in terms of holding developers to account as part of the planning process. So again, that's an additional opportunity to raise those sorts of questions and points and hold developers and applicants to account more as part of that earlier engagement in the process. So those would be my comments, Madam Chairman, in response to Councillor Mann's questions and comments there.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to let Councillor Abbott come back, and then I'm going to wind this up for tonight because we've been over 3¼ hours and I think we're all getting a little tired. Some of us have got to make our way home via roadworks that have closed roads. So Councillor Abbott, I will let you come back, and then there'll be the final person for now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'll be extremely brief. It's because I didn't detect an answer to my final point when I spoke. So obviously the council would want to make sure that this consultation is fair. That's a very important principle. And so therefore my question is, the Developing Democracy Group is an important step in this consultation process. It's the primary body that recommends to council constitutional changes. If an entire group representing 20% of the members of this authority is not represented on there, including the group leader, myself, how is that fair? Now, I don't necessarily expect an answer now, but perhaps officers could think about that and let me know, because it seems to be quite important when all other groups are going to be represented on the DDG. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Councillor Cunningham, you're waving.
Yes, Madam Chairman, sorry to prolong the discussion any further. I would respectfully ask, is that actually a matter relating to planning officers this evening? I strongly suggest if Councillor Abbott has ongoing concerns with the composition of committees, he should take them up with governance officers outside this meeting using appropriate channels and not use a wide-ranging discussion on planning as a means and vehicle to do it. I think that's cynical, it is unnecessary, and he is an experienced member and should pursue the appropriate procedures.
Well, actually, I'm fully aware that democratic services and monitoring officers are viewing this. That's why I said it.
Chairman, if it is this, Councillor Abbott, whilst I'm here as a meeting facilitator, I will do my best to answer your question. The DDG is a working group of the Cabinet, and it is a matter for the leader as to how he determines that membership. That membership was considered at full council, and I understand that is not a matter that you are happy with. DDG is a working group that is part of the constitutional review process, as is the corporate governance group. This scheme of delegation will go out for consultation. It will then go to DGG, and then it will go to the corporate governance group, where there are other members of the authority who do not sit on that committee. It will be open for all members to be able to comment on the scheme of delegation when it appears on the council agenda in due course. However, if you do have any particular concerns, then we can address this outside this planning committee. I'm more than happy to talk to you, as I'm sure Kim Cole is the monitoring officer. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Members, I'm now going to draw this to a conclusion, and we have a recommendation. A recommendation can be found on page 169, and there are 3 recommendations, which I'm sure you can all read, and I am going to take the vote on the recommendations, on the 3 at once. Councillor Abbott.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Bowers.
4.
Councillor Cunningham,
4.
Councillor Horner,
4.
Councillor Johnson,
4.
Councillor Mann.
Noting.
Yes, they are for. Yes, they are the noting. Yes, they are noting. Yeah. Councillor Monday,
4.
Councillor Ritchie,
4.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
4.
Thank you. And Councillor Wrench.
4.
Thank you, members. That has been noted by all members except one with one abstention. So I will now bring this meeting to a close. I will close the meeting at 22:28. I will thank all members for their attendance. I would like to thank everyone that's been watching on YouTube. I'd like to thank all officers, both planning and our assistants that we get from Emma and other Alison in the background. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I ask the webcasting officer to terminate this broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel, I'd ask members to complete the short survey which has been emailed to you. This is very important to help us improve our meetings going forward. I would also like to remind you that the Council retained performance data relating to your connection to this meeting in the event of a legal challenge. Please can the webcasting officer confirm that the YouTube broadcast has now stopped?